She organized the glittering gala where Manhattan's elite celebrated power and wealth, but no one saw her. Not until a dangerous man emerged from the shadows and spoke 4 words that changed everything. "You deserve to take up space." What Seraphina Vale didn't know was that Adrian Morelli wasn't just watching her that night. He was choosing her. And his choice would pull her into a world of deadly rivals, warehouse confrontations, and a love so consuming it would force a crime lord to burn down his empire just to keep her safe. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Blackwood Legacy Foundation Gala glittered like a constellation fallen to earth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, casting prismatic patterns on marble floors that had witnessed decades of Manhattan's most exclusive gatherings. Women in couture gowns worth more than cars floated between champagne stations, their laughter high and crystalline. Men in bespoke suits discussed mergers and acquisitions with the casual confidence of those who'd never known uncertainty. And moving through it all like a ghost, unnoticed and unremarked upon, was the woman who had made it possible. Seraphina Vale stood near the entrance to the terrace, her clipboard pressed against the deep sapphire silk of a dress she'd bought on credit and would be paying off for months. 28 years old, elegant in a way that came from careful observation rather than natural privilege, she watched the event unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew every detail intimately because she had orchestrated them all. The floral arrangements, white roses and orchids, exactly as Mrs. Blackwood had demanded during their 4th revision meeting. The lighting, warm but not yellow, bright but not harsh, adjusted 3 times before the first guest arrived. The timing, cocktails at 7, dinner at 8:30, speeches at 9:45, dessert and dancing until midnight. Every moment planned, every contingency prepared for, every potential disaster quietly averted before it could materialize. She had worked on this gala for 6 months, and in the 3 hours since the doors had opened, not a single person had acknowledged her presence. Excuse me. A woman in emerald green, wife of a tech billionaire, donor of $2 million, brushed past Seraphina without meeting her eyes, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. Seraphina stepped back automatically, making herself smaller, taking up less space. It was a practiced movement, honed over years of existing in rooms where she was necessary but not valued, essential but not seen. The silent architect, her colleague Marcus had once called her, intending it as a compliment. You make everything run perfectly, and no one even knows you're there. He hadn't understood why she'd gone quiet after that. Across the ballroom, she could see her supervisor, Catherine Whitmore, holding court near the donor wall where names were etched in brass according to contribution level. Catherine wore cream Valentino and diamonds that caught the light with every gesture, and she was currently accepting congratulations from the Blackwood family patriarch for Kinshasa, single-handedly organizing the foundation's most successful fundraiser in a decade. Seraphina had written every word of the program Catherine held in her perfectly manicured hands. She had negotiated with the caterer when they'd tried to substitute cheaper salmon. She had personally confirmed attendance with each of the 237 guests. She had stayed until 3 in the morning the night before, directing the setup crew because Catherine had been at a spa in Connecticut. And now Catherine smiled graciously, accepting praise for vision and execution, leadership and dedication, while Seraphina stood 15 feet away holding a clipboard, invisible as air. The familiar ache settled in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, something more resigned and gray. This was her life. This had always been her life. The person behind the scenes, the one who made things work, the woman no one remembered to thank or acknowledge or see. Seraphina! One of the catering staff appeared at her elbow, young and flustered. The kitchen wants to know if they should start plating dessert now or wait until after the speeches. After, Seraphina said quietly, checking her watch. Mrs. Blackwood's speech is scheduled for 9:45. Tell them to begin plating at 9:50, service at 10:15. Got it, thanks. The girl disappeared back toward the kitchen, and Seraphina returned her attention to the ballroom, scanning for problems, for details out of place, for the small disasters only she would notice and prevent. Everything was perfect. Everything was always perfect. And she was always alone in the perfection she created. The terrace doors stood open to her right, letting in the cool April night. Through them, she could see the Manhattan skyline glittering against darkness, a million lights in a million windows where a million other people lived lives that mattered, lives that left marks, lives that would be remembered. She needed air. Checking once more that everything was running smoothly. Catherine still basking in unearned praise, guests mingling happily, waiters circulating with precision. Seraphina slipped through the terrace doors into the night. The temperature dropped immediately, cool enough to raise goosebumps on her bare arms, but not cold enough to drive her back inside. The terrace wrapped around the eastern corner of the hotel, offering a view of the city that never failed to make her feel both infinitely small and strangely comforted. Out here she could breathe. Out here she didn't have to perform the delicate dance of being essential while remaining unnoticed. She walked to the stone balustrade and leaned against it, letting the city's ambient sound wash over her. Traffic below, music from another party on a higher floor, the distant wail of a siren heading downtown. You deserve to take up space. The voice came from behind her, low and assured, with an accent she couldn't quite place. American, but refined, cultured, with the faintest trace of something European underneath. Seraphina turned. A man stood in the shadows near the terrace doors, so still she hadn't noticed him when she'd come outside. As he stepped forward into the light spilling from the ballroom, she felt her breath catch. He was probably in his mid-30s, tall and lean in a black suit that fit with the kind of perfection that came from custom tailoring. Dark hair, dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Features that were striking rather than conventionally handsome, strong jaw, straight nose, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled but would be devastating when it did. But it wasn't his appearance that made her pulse quicken. It was the way he looked at her. Not past her. Not through her. At her. Like she was the only person in the entire city who mattered. "I'm sorry?" Seraphina managed, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "You deserve to take up space," he repeated, moving closer with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never been told where he couldn't go. "I've been watching you all evening. Most women would have found that concerning. Seraphina found it strange. Not threatening. Despite his intensity, despite the darkness in his eyes, she didn't feel afraid. Curious, perhaps. Uncertain, but not afraid. "That's not creepy at all," she said, surprising herself with the dry humor in her tone. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "I suppose it sounds that way. Let me rephrase. I've been observing the gala, and I noticed something interesting. Everyone in that ballroom is performing, playing roles, wearing masks, pretending to be more important, or more generous, or more interesting than they actually are. Except you." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. "You weren't performing," he continued. "You were working, making sure everything ran perfectly while everyone else took credit. And then you slipped out here, into the dark, like you were trying to disappear entirely." Seraphina's fingers tightened on the stone balustrade. "You don't know anything about me. I know you organized this entire event. I know Catherine Whitmore is currently accepting congratulations for your work. I know you've been standing in corners all night, watching, adjusting, fixing small problems no one else noticed. And I know," his dark eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity, "that you're exhausted from being invisible." The words hit like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "Who are you?" Seraphina asked quietly. "Adrian Morelli." He extended his hand. "And you're Seraphina Vale. I saw your name on the planning documents." His handshake was firm, warm, and lasted a fraction of a second longer than professional courtesy required. When he released her hand, she felt the absence of his touch like a sudden cold draft. "You read the planning documents?" She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Why?" "I like to know how things work, how they're built, who builds them." Adrian turned to look out at the city, and for the first time she could see him in profile. Classical features, yes, but also something harder underneath, something that had seen darkness and survived it. Most people at events like this never think about the infrastructure. They enjoy the experience without caring about the work that creates it. They're consumers, not creators. And which are you? Both. Neither. He glanced at her with something that might have been amusement. I appreciate craftsmanship. Excellence that goes unrecognized interests me more than mediocrity that gets applauded. Seraphina studied him, trying to understand what was happening. Men didn't approach her at events like this. They certainly didn't notice her work or seek her out on empty terraces to tell her she deserved to take up space. "Are you one of the donors?" she asked, mentally reviewing the guest list. She didn't remember an Adrian Morelli, but there had been several last-minute additions, guests added at the Blackwood family's request without going through the standard vetting process. "I'm a guest of Edward Blackwood," Adrian said, which wasn't quite an answer. He thought I might be interested in the foundation's work. "Are you?" "Not particularly." The honesty was startling. "I don't believe charity fixes systemic problems, but I am interested in people who build things from nothing, people who create order from chaos, people who see what needs to be done and do it, regardless of whether they receive recognition." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity of his attention made her feel exposed, seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and exhilarating. "Why do you stay?" he asked. "In a job where you're treated like you don't exist?" The question caught her off guard. "I need the job." Not everyone has the luxury of walking away from employment because they're underappreciated. "Fair enough," Adrian nodded slowly. "But there's a difference between staying because you have to and staying because you don't believe you deserve better. Which is it?" Seraphina felt anger flare, hot and sudden. "You don't know me well enough to make that kind of judgment." "You're right, I don't." He didn't look offended by her sharpness. If anything, he seemed pleased by it. "But I've built my life on reading people, on seeing what they don't say out loud. And what I see when I look at you is someone who has made herself so small, so invisible, that she started to believe that's all she's worth." "And you've appointed yourself to enlighten me?" Seraphina's voice had an edge now. "Some stranger who watched me from across a ballroom and decided he understood my entire life?" "No." Adrian's voice softened, losing some of its analytical distance. "I'm someone who recognizes what it looks like when a person has been told they don't matter so many times they've started to believe it. Because I spent years feeling exactly the same way." The admission hung in the cool night air between them. Inside, through the terrace doors, Seraphina could hear the clink of glasses, the swell of conversation and laughter. Out here, there was only the sound of the city and the presence of this strange, intense man who looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "Why did you really come out here?" she asked quietly. Adrian was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Because I've been in rooms full of people my entire adult life, and tonight was the first time in years I saw someone who looked the way I used to feel. Alone in the crowd. Essential but unvalued. Present but unseen." He paused. "And I thought maybe you needed someone to tell you that you're wrong." "Wrong about what?" "About not deserving to take up space. About not mattering. About being invisible." His dark eyes held hers. "You're not invisible, Seraphina. You're just surrounded by people who are too shallow to see you." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from inside the ballroom. Raised voices, the crash of something breaking, guests turning toward some disturbance Seraphina couldn't see from her position on the terrace. Her professional instincts kicked in immediately. "I have to—" "Go," Adrian said, stepping back. "But before you do, I want you to consider something." She paused, already moving toward the door. "This feeling of being invisible?" His voice followed her. "It's not permanent. It's a choice you're making, and you can unmake it whenever you're ready." Seraphina wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't understand how the world worked for people like her, who hadn't been born with money or connections, or the kind of confidence that let you take up space without apology. But she didn't have time. Inside, she found that one of the ice sculptures had toppled during what appeared to be an overly enthusiastic conversation between two inebriated donors. Water and ice spread across the floor near the dessert table, waiters scrambling with towels, guests stepping back with varying degrees of concern and amusement. Catherine Whitmore stood at the center of it all, looking beautiful and helpless, clearly waiting for someone else to solve the problem. Seraphina moved into action. 20 minutes later, the mess was cleaned up. A backup arrangement of flowers had been strategically placed to fill the empty space, and the dessert service was proceeding smoothly. Catherine had disappeared to refresh her makeup, and Seraphina stood near the kitchen entrance, checking items off her mental list, making sure the rest of the evening would proceed without incident. She looked toward the terrace doors. Adrian Morelli was gone. She told herself she felt relieved. The conversation had been strange, unsettling, too intimate for strangers. She didn't need some arrogant man telling her about her own life, making pronouncements about her worth based on a few minutes of observation. But as the evening wound down, as guests began to leave with effusive compliments for Catherine and barely a glance in her direction, Seraphina found herself thinking about his words. You deserve to take up space. What would that even look like? She had spent so long making herself small, accommodating, invisible. First as a child in the foster system, learning early that the quietest kids caused the least problems and therefore survived the longest in each placement. Then in college, working 2 jobs while carrying a full course load, keeping her head down and her ambitions modest, because dreaming too big felt dangerous when you had no safety net. And now, at 28, in a career that should have felt like success, but instead felt like slowly drowning in invisibility. Taking up space. The phrase felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she'd never learned to speak. The last guest trickled out around 11:30. Catherine departed at midnight with barely a word of acknowledgement, leaving Seraphina to oversee the breakdown and cleanup with the hotel staff. It was past 1 in the morning when she finally left the Saint. Regis, exhausted and still wearing the sapphire dress that had seemed so elegant at 7, and now just felt like an expensive costume. The city was quieter at this hour, but never truly silent. Seraphina stood on the sidewalk, debating whether to splurge on a cab or save money by taking the subway despite the late hour. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb in front of her, not a taxi, something more expensive. The passenger window rolled down smoothly. Adrian Morelli looked out at her from the back seat. You're still here, Seraphina said, too tired to be surprised. I'm persistent when I see something worth pursuing. He opened the door. Let me give you a ride home. I don't get into cars with strangers who watch me from across ballrooms. Wise policy. The almost smile appeared again. But I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm Adrian Morelli, guest of Edward Blackwood, and I spent the last 4 hours at one of Manhattan's most tedious charity events instead of leaving after 20 minutes like I wanted to, all because I was hoping to see you again. Why? Because you interested me. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And because I meant what I said on the terrace. You deserve better than being invisible. Seraphina looked at the open car door, at the warm interior, at the man who had somehow seen her when everyone else looked through her. Every rational instinct told her to refuse, to walk away, to maintain the careful boundaries that had kept her safe, if lonely. But she was tired of being safe, tired of being invisible, tired of making herself small. If you're a serial killer, she said, I'm going to be very disappointed. Adrian's laugh was low and genuine. Noted. Not a serial killer, I promise. Seraphina got in the car. The interior smelled like leather and something else, something expensive and masculine that she couldn't identify. As Adrian gave the driver her address, Brooklyn, a modest apartment in a neighborhood that was trying hard to gentrify, she settled into the seat, acutely aware of his presence beside her in the darkness. So what do you do? She asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to fill the silence. When you're not attending tedious charity events? I own several businesses, import-export primarily, some real estate, private security consulting. His voice was casual, but something in his tone suggested there was more he wasn't saying. I spend most of my time making sure things run smoothly. Like me, Seraphina said wryly. Like you. He turned to look at her in the dim light. Except I get paid well for it and receive recognition for my work. Must be nice. It has its advantages, Adrian paused, and its complications. There was something in the way he said complications that made Seraphina think he was choosing his words carefully, revealing some truth while concealing others. She wanted to ask more, to understand this man who had appeared from nowhere and seemed determined to upend her carefully maintained equilibrium. But the car was already pulling up in front of her building, a converted warehouse with industrial windows and fire escapes, trying hard to look artistic rather than run down. This is me, Seraphina said, reaching for the door handle. Adrian's hand on her wrist stopped her, gentle but firm. Have dinner with me. I don't know you. Then have dinner with me so you can know me. His thumb traced a small circle on the inside of her wrist, sending an unexpected shiver through her. Tomorrow night. Somewhere public, somewhere safe, somewhere you can leave whenever you want. Seraphina looked at him, at the darkness in his eyes that somehow didn't frighten her, at the intensity of his attention that made her feel seen for the first time in years. Every rational part of her brain was screaming warnings. She didn't know this man. He had appeared out of nowhere. He was too interested, too intense, too everything. But the part of her that was tired of being invisible, the part that remembered his words on the terrace, "You deserve to take up space," that part wanted to say yes. One dinner, she heard herself say. Somewhere public. The smile that crossed Adrian's face was worth whatever risk she was taking. "I'll pick you up at 7. "I'll meet you there," Seraphina corrected. "Text me the address." "Fair enough." He released her wrist, and she immediately missed the warmth of his touch. "May I have your number?" She rattled it off, watching as he entered it into his phone. Expensive, sleek, probably worth more than her monthly rent. Seraphina. He said her name like he was tasting it, learning its shape in his mouth. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk about what it means to take up space." She got out of the car, climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, and stood in her tiny kitchen still wearing the sapphire dress, her phone clutched in her hand, wondering what she had just agreed to. The text came 5 minutes later. "Maria, 7 p.m. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." Followed immediately by another message. "Take space." Seraphina looked at those 2 words for a long time, feeling something shift inside her, subtle but fundamental, like a door she didn't know existed had suddenly opened. She was 28 years old, invisible, exhausted from making herself small. And tomorrow night she was having dinner with a stranger who looked at her like she mattered. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was dangerous. Maybe it was the first genuinely reckless thing she'd done in a decade of playing it safe. But as she got ready for bed, as she finally took off the dress and let down her hair and washed away the makeup that had made her feel elegant for a few hours, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had seen her, and she wanted to know what would happen if she let herself be seen again. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of April rain that made Manhattan look like a film noir backdrop. Seraphina woke to her alarm at 6:30, the memory of the previous night settling over her with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Had she really agreed to have dinner with a complete stranger? Yes. Yes, she had. She went through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, the careful application of makeup that enhanced without being obvious, the selection of work clothes that were professional without being memorable, the armor of invisibility. But as she stood in front of her closet, choosing between navy and charcoal, she thought about Adrian's text. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. When had she last felt powerful? The question nagged at her on the subway, at her desk where she arrived before anyone else as usual, through the morning meetings where Catherine Whitmore described the previous night's gala as flawlessly executed, without once mentioning Seraphina's name. She should have been angry, should have spoken up, claimed credit, demanded recognition, but old habits were strong, and invisibility felt safer than confrontation. At lunch, she walked to a boutique she'd passed 100 times but never entered. Too expensive, too elegant, too much for someone like her. But today, thinking about dinner at Maria, she'd looked it up. Upscale Italian, Michelin-starred, the kind of place where entrees cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She pushed through the door. The saleswoman who approached was exactly the type who usually made Seraphina feel small. Impeccably dressed, perfectly made up, assessing Seraphina's off-the-rack work clothes with a single dismissive glance. But Seraphina thought about Adrian's words, about taking up space, about deserving better. "I need something for dinner tonight," she said, her voice steady. "Somewhere elegant, something that makes a statement." The saleswoman's expression shifted, professional interest replacing casual dismissal. "What kind of statement?" Seraphina met her eyes. "That I belong." $300 later, more than she should have spent, more than was responsible, but worth it. Seraphina left the boutique with a garment bag containing a dress in deep burgundy silk that fit like it had been made for her body. Not revealing, not flashy, but undeniably elegant, powerful. She spent the rest of the afternoon distracted, checking her phone compulsively, even though she knew Adrian wouldn't text again. The anticipation was almost painful. When had she last looked forward to something this much? At 5:30, she left the office, ignoring Catherine's surprised look. Normally, Seraphina stayed until 7 or 8, catching up on work, preparing for the next event. But not today. Today, she was having dinner with a man who had looked at her like she mattered. Back at her apartment, she took her time getting ready. The luxury of a long shower, careful makeup, hair twisted into a low knot that looked effortless but had taken 20 minutes to perfect. The burgundy dress slid over her skin like water, fitted at the bodice, flowing at the skirt, sophisticated without trying too hard. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Powerful. The word settled into her bones, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. At 6:45, she called a car service. Another extravagance, but she wasn't arriving at Maria on the subway. Not tonight. The restaurant was in Central South, all sleek lines and warm lighting, the kind of place where celebrities dined and deals were made. Seraphina gave her name to the host, expecting to wait, to be told Adrian hadn't arrived yet. "Mr. Morelli is already here," the host said smoothly. "Right this way, Ms. Vale." He led her through the main dining room. She caught glimpses of well-dressed couples, heard the murmur of cultured conversation, smelled garlic and wine and something sweet, to a more private area in the back. Adrian sat at a corner table, and when he saw her, he stood. The impact of him in the soft lighting was almost physical. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, white shirt open at the collar, and the darkness in his eyes seemed deeper, more intense than she remembered. But it was the way he looked at her that stole her breath, like she was the only woman in the entire city, like she was worth standing up for. "Seraphina." Her name and his voice sounded like a promise. "You look extraordinary." "You said to wear something that makes me feel powerful." She let him pull out her chair, acutely aware of his proximity as he settled her at the table. "This was the closest I could find." "Then I'd hate to see what you consider truly powerful." Adrian returned to his seat, and there was something in his smile. Appreciation, yes, but also a kind of recognition, like he understood exactly what this dress represented. "How was your day?" "Long, invisible, the usual." Seraphina accepted a menu from a hovering waiter. "How was yours?" "Productive. I closed a deal I've been working on for months, fired someone who thought loyalty was optional, made a significant investment in a promising technology company." He said it all casually, like he was discussing the weather, and spent an unreasonable amount of time thinking about this dinner. The honesty caught her off guard. "You don't seem like someone who admits to anticipation." "I'm not. Usually." Adrian's gaze held hers across the table. "You're not a usual situation." Before Seraphina could respond, the waiter returned to take their orders. Adrian ordered in Italian, fluent, easy, with the accent of someone who had spent real time in Italy. Seraphina ordered the first thing that looked good, too aware of his attention to make careful decisions. When they were alone again, Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same unsettling intensity from the night before. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "The real version, not the professional summary you give at networking events." "That's a broad question." "Then start anywhere. I want to know who you are when no one's watching." Seraphina considered deflecting, giving him the sanitized version she'd perfected over years of job interviews and first dates that went nowhere. But something about the way he looked at her, genuinely interested, willing to wait, made her want to tell the truth. "I grew up in foster care," she said quietly. "A dozen different homes between ages 6 and 18. Never got adopted, never found a permanent family. Learned early that the best way to survive was to be useful without being noticed." Adrian nodded slowly, no pity in his expression, just understanding. "What happened to your parents?" "Mother died when I was 5. Drug overdose. Father was never in the picture." The old pain had dulled to a distant ache. "I don't remember much about her, just fragments. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her laugh, the way she used to call me her little butterfly." "Butterfly?" Seraphina smiled slightly. "She said I'd transform into something beautiful someday, that I just needed time." She was right. The simple statement, delivered without flattery or artifice, made her throat tight. "What about you?" she asked, needing to shift the focus. Where did you grow up? Chicago, South Side. Not the part tourists photograph. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. My father ran a small business, legitimate on paper, less legitimate in practice. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just me and my uncle Lorenzo learning the family trade. Which was? Survival. He said it simply. In neighborhoods like that, you either learn to protect yourself or you become prey. I learned early. The waiter arrived with their first course, giving Seraphina a moment to process. There was darkness in Adrian's past. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the way his jaw tightened when he mentioned his uncle. But he had survived it, clearly, had built something from it. When did you come to New York? She asked when they were alone again. 10 years ago. I was 25, ambitious, and tired of working for other people's empires. Adrian picked up his wine glass, but didn't drink, just held it, watching the light move through the dark red liquid. I had skills, connections, and enough money saved to make a start. Everything else I built from there. Import-export, you said. Among other things. There was that careful tone again, the sense of truth partially revealed. I identify opportunities, acquire resources, facilitate connections between parties who need each other. I'm very good at seeing what people want and helping them get it. For a price. Everything has a price, Seraphina. The question is whether you're willing to pay it. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, the food exquisite but barely registered. Seraphina was too focused on the man across from her, on the careful dance they were doing around deeper truths. Why me? She asked suddenly. There were 200 people at that gala. Beautiful women in designer gowns, important men making deals. Why did you notice the invisible event planner? Adrian set down his fork, giving her his full attention. Because everyone else in that room was performing, playing roles, wearing masks, pretending to be more or less than they actually were. But you, he leaned forward slightly. You were real, competent, exhausted, quietly brilliant, and so convinced of your own invisibility that you'd stopped even trying to be seen. And I thought, here is someone who has been told she doesn't matter so many times that she's started to believe it. Someone like I used to be. Used to be? Before I decided that other people's assessment of my worth was less important than my own assessment. His dark eyes held hers. Before I stopped apologizing for taking up space. How did you do it? The question came out quieter than she intended. How did you stop making yourself small? Adrian was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight. I stopped waiting for permission to exist. I stopped believing that I had to earn the right to matter. And I surrounded myself with people who saw my value instead of those who were threatened by it. Sounds simple when you say it like that. It's not simple at all. It's terrifying. He reached across the table and his fingers brushed hers, just a moment of contact, but it sent heat through her entire body. But the alternative is spending your whole life invisible, and you're too extraordinary for that. Seraphina wanted to argue, to point out that he barely knew her, that he was making assumptions based on a few hours of observation. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, the part that had been silent and small for so long, was screaming, yes, finally, someone who sees. I don't know how to be anything else, she admitted. Then let me show you. Adrian's thumb traced a slow circle on her palm. Have dinner with me again. Let me take you places you've never been. Let me introduce you to a version of yourself you've never met. Why? What do you get out of this? The pleasure of your company, the satisfaction of watching someone extraordinary realize their own worth. He paused. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, the chance to know you better. They finished dinner in a haze of conversation that ranged from profound to silly. He made her laugh, talking about the absurdity of charity galas. She made him smile, describing the various disasters she'd prevented at events over the years. The wine flowed, courses came and went, and by the time dessert arrived, Seraphina realized she hadn't thought about work or invisibility, or her careful boundaries in over an hour. She had just existed, taken up space. It felt revolutionary. Come with me, Adrian said as they left the restaurant into the cool spring night. I want to show you something. Every sensible instinct told Seraphina to say no, to go home, to not extend this evening into territory that might be dangerous. But she looked at Adrian. at the intensity in his eyes, at the slight smile that suggested he knew exactly what internal battle she was fighting, and said yes. They walked through Manhattan's nighttime streets, Adrian's hand at the small of her back, proprietary but not possessive. He led her to a building in Midtown, nodded to a security guard who clearly knew him, and guided her into an elevator that required a key to access. "Where are we going?" Seraphina asked as they ascended. "The roof. Trust me." The elevator opened onto a private rooftop garden, manicured greenery, soft lighting, and a view of the city that made her gasp. The skyline spread out in every direction, a constellation of lights against the dark sky, the city alive and infinite beneath them. "This is incredible," she breathed. "Who—" "I own the building." Adrian said it casually, like it was nothing. "This is my favorite place in the city. I come here when I need to remember why I fought so hard to build what I have." Seraphina turned to look at him. "And you brought me here because I wanted you to see what I see. Not the ground level where everyone else operates. The view from up here, where you can see the whole picture, where you can understand your place in it." He moved to stand beside her at the railing. "You've been looking at the world from the ground for too long, Seraphina. It's time you saw it from up here." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the glittering city. And for the first time in her life, Seraphina felt like she belonged in a view this beautiful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For making me feel like I matter." Adrian turned to face her, and the intensity in his expression made her pulse race. "You do matter, and I'm going to keep showing you that until you believe it." Then he kissed her, gentle at first, questioning, giving her room to pull away. But Seraphina didn't pull away. She leaned in, her hands finding the lapels of his jacket, and kissed him back with all the hunger of someone who had been invisible for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I want to see you again," he said. "Tomorrow, the day after. Every day you'll let me. This is moving fast. Too fast?" Seraphina thought about her small apartment, her invisible job, her careful life where nothing ever changed and nothing ever hurt because nothing ever mattered enough to hurt. She thought about safety and boundaries and all the reasons this was probably a terrible idea. Then she thought about his words. "You deserve to take up space." "No," she heard herself say. "Not too fast, just different." Adrian smiled and it transformed his face, still intense, still dark, but also genuinely happy. Different is good. Different is what you need. He was right. She was 28 years old and she had been invisible for long enough. Whatever this was, whatever Adrian Morelli represented, she was saying yes. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future felt like something worth being present for. 3 days after their first dinner, a delivery arrived at Seraphina's desk. A single white rose in a crystal vase, pristine and perfect, with a card in dark, elegant handwriting. "Take space." Catherine Whitmore walked past, noticed the flower, and raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Secret admirer?" "Something like that," Seraphina murmured, her fingers tracing the velvet petals. Her phone buzzed. Adrian's text was characteristically direct. "Dinner tonight? I want to show you something." She should have said no, should have slowed things down, established boundaries, protected herself from whatever this was becoming. But the past 3 days had been different. Texts at odd hours, a phone call that lasted until 2 in the morning talking about everything and nothing, another delivery yesterday of her favorite coffee with a note that said simply, "Saw. Thought of you." He was weaving himself into her life with the quiet inevitability of dawn breaking over the city. "Where?" she texted back. "My place. I'll cook." Every alarm bell in her head went off. His place. Private. Intimate. Dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical safety and everything to do with the way her heart raced when she thought about him. "That's very trusting of you," she typed. "What if I'm the serial killer?" His response came immediately. "Then I'll die happy." 7 p.m. "I'll send a car." She stared at her phone, at the absurdity of this entire situation. She had known this man for less than a week. She had no idea who he really was beyond the carefully curated information he chose to share. Import-export could mean anything. Private security consulting could mean anything. But when she thought about saying no, about returning to her careful, invisible life, something in her chest constricted painfully. "No car," she texted. "Send me the address. I'll get there myself. Independent. I appreciate that. See you tonight." The address he sent was in Tribeca. Not surprising, given what little she knew about him. Old money neighborhood, converted warehouses now worth millions. The kind of place where celebrities hid behind industrial facades and private security. Seraphina left work at 5:30 again, ignoring the pointed look from Catherine. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. She was done making herself small for people who didn't see her anyway. At home, she stood in front of her closet feeling both excited and terrified. What did you wear to a man's apartment for dinner? The burgundy dress felt too formal. Jeans felt too casual. She finally settled on black pants and a silk blouse the color of champagne, elegant, but not trying too hard. The car she called dropped her in front of a converted warehouse with massive windows and a door that looked like it belonged in a medieval castle. She checked the address twice before pressing the intercom. "Come up." Adrian's voice crackled through the speaker and the lock buzzed open. The elevator was industrial chic, all exposed brick and polished metal. It opened directly into his loft, and Seraphina stepped out into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River. Exposed beams crossed a ceiling that had to be 20 feet high. The furnishings were minimal, but clearly expensive. Leather and steel, art that looked original, books in multiple languages lining custom shelves. The space managed to feel both massive and intimate, industrial and warm. And in the open kitchen area, wearing jeans and a black Henley that showed off shoulders she'd only seen in suits before, Adrian stirred something on the stove that smelled incredible. "You're early," he said, looking up with a smile. "I like that." "You said 7. It's 6:58. Punctual and independent." He gestured to the kitchen island where a bottle of wine was already open, 2 glasses waiting. "Pour yourself a drink. Make yourself comfortable. I'll be done in about 10 minutes. Seraphina poured wine with hands that weren't quite steady, acutely aware that she was in his private space, that the door had closed behind her, that they were alone in a way they hadn't been before. But she didn't feel threatened. If anything, she felt curious about this space that reflected him, about the man who moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who cooked often, about what tonight would reveal. She walked to the windows, looking out at the river where the last light of day painted the water in shades of amber and rose. Behind her, she could hear the quiet sounds of cooking, the sizzle of something in a pan, the clink of utensils, water running. "This is beautiful," she said, not turning around. "How long have you lived here?" 5 years. Bought it as a shell, renovated it myself. Well, supervised the renovation. I'm not particularly handy with tools, but I know what I want and I'm willing to pay for it. That seems to be a theme with you. Knowing what I want? His voice was closer now. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, 2 plates in his hands. Or being willing to pay for it. Both. Then you're more observant than most people I know. He set the plates on a dining table she hadn't noticed before. Sleek glass and steel positioned to maximize the river view. "Come, eat. Tell me about your day." The food was simple but perfect. Pasta with what tasted like homemade sauce, fresh bread, a salad with vinaigrette that had exactly the right balance of acid and oil. Seraphina took a bite and couldn't suppress a small sound of pleasure. "You really can cook. My mother was Italian. She believed that food was love and that a man who couldn't feed himself was only half a person." Something crossed Adrian's face. Grief, maybe, or nostalgia. "She died before she could teach me everything, but I learned enough." "How old were you when she died?" 12. He said it matter-of-factly, but Seraphina heard the weight underneath. Cancer, fast and brutal, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. "I'm sorry." "So am I, every day." Adrian took a sip of wine. "But you understand that, don't you? The particular loneliness of losing your mother young, the way it shapes everything that comes after." Seraphina nodded slowly. "It's like walking through the world with a piece missing. You learn to function around the absence, but it never really fills in." "No, it doesn't." His dark eyes held hers across the table. "But you learn to build something else in the empty space, something that belongs only to you." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Seraphina found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did with anyone. There was something about Adrian, the way he didn't fill silence with meaningless chatter, the way he seemed content to just exist in the same space with her, that felt both foreign and exactly right. "Tell me about your work," she said eventually. "The real version, not the vague generalities you give at dinner parties." Adrian smiled slightly. "Direct. I like that about you. You keep saying you like things about me. Eventually I'm going to ask you to make a list so I can check it against reality." "Fair enough." He set down his fork, giving her his full attention in that intense way that always made her pulse quicken. "I told you I do import-export. That's true. I also told you I do private security consulting. Also true. What I didn't tell you is that the lines between those things are sometimes blurry." "Blurry how?" "I move things for people who need discretion. I provide protection for clients who can't or won't use traditional security services. I facilitate connections between parties who operate in spaces where conventional business practices don't apply." He watched her carefully, gauging her reaction. "I exist in the gray areas, Seraphina. Not quite legal, not quite illegal, just necessary." She should have been alarmed. Should have asked for clarification, demanded details, maybe even left. But something in the way he was looking at her, honest, unflinching, giving her the truth and waiting to see what she'd do with it, kept her in her seat. "Are you dangerous?" she asked quietly. "To you? Never." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "To people who threaten what's mine? Absolutely. And what's yours?" "Still being determined." His gaze didn't waver. "But I'm hoping that list is about to get longer." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and promise, and things Seraphina wasn't ready to name yet. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "You barely know me. For all you know, I could go to the police, tell them you just confessed to operating in legal gray areas." "You could." Adrian leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed despite the potential threat. "But you won't." "How do you know?" "Because you spent your entire childhood in a system that claimed to protect vulnerable children but actually just shuffled you between houses like furniture. Because you work for people who take credit for your labor and leave you invisible. Because you've seen firsthand that the people who claim to operate within the rules are often the ones causing the most harm." He paused. "And because I think part of you recognizes that the world isn't as simple as legal and illegal, right and wrong. It's mostly just shades of gray, and survival means knowing how to navigate them." Seraphina couldn't argue with that. She had seen too much, experienced too much to believe in simple morality anymore. "So what exactly do you do?" she pressed. "Specifically, right now, I'm negotiating the acquisition of a shipping company that moves legitimate cargo 99% of the time. I'm providing security for a tech entrepreneur who's being threatened by a former business partner. I'm consulting on a real estate deal in Brooklyn that involves some complicated zoning issues and even more complicated relationships between the current owners and the developers." He ticked off each point like he was discussing grocery shopping. "Next week, I'll probably be doing something completely different. And the 1% of the time the shipping company isn't moving legitimate cargo? I didn't say it was my shipping company, yet." The almost smile appeared. "But hypothetically, if someone needed to move sensitive materials without attracting attention from customs officials who asked too many questions, a shipping company with an excellent reputation and minimal oversight would be very valuable." "Sensitive materials like what? Like anything that powerful people want to keep private? Could be art, could be documents, could be perfectly legal pharmaceuticals that happen to be much cheaper in one country than another." He met her eyes steadily. "I don't move weapons, I don't move people, I don't touch anything that hurts kids. Those are my lines, and I don't cross them. But you do cross other lines. Every single day. And I sleep fine at night because the people I work for, the ones who need discretion, who operate in gray areas, they're not cartoon villains. They're business people navigating complicated situations, refugees trying to get family members to safety, artists trying to move work without paying extortionate fees to corrupt officials. The world is more complicated than good guys and bad guys, Seraphina. Surely you've learned that by now." She had. Growing up in foster care, watching caseworkers who claimed to care but rarely did, seeing families who looked perfect from the outside but were toxic within, learning that survival meant understanding the gap between what people claimed to be and what they actually were. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked again. The truth this time. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard before. Because I want you in my life, and I won't build that on lies. Because you deserve to know who I am before you decide whether you want to be part of this. And because he reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. I think you're strong enough to handle the truth, stronger than you give yourself credit for. Seraphina looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his tanned skin and her paler complexion, at the way his thumb traced small circles on her wrist that sent shivers through her entire body. I should be scared, she said quietly. I should thank you for dinner and leave and never see you again. But you're not going to. No. She looked up, meeting his dark eyes. I'm not. Why? Because for the first time in my life, someone is being completely honest with me. No performance, no pretense, no trying to be something you're not. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. And because I'm tired of playing it safe, tired of being invisible, tired of accepting whatever scraps the world decides to give me. What do you want instead? The question was simple, but the answer felt massive, world-changing. I want to matter, Seraphina heard herself say. I want to take up space. I want to stop apologizing for existing. Adrian stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. Then let me show you how. He led her to the windows, positioning her in front of him so they both faced the city. His hand settled on her shoulders, warm and solid, and she could feel the heat of him against her back. Look out there, he said quietly, his breath stirring her hair. Millions of people, all playing their assigned roles, following rules they never questioned, making themselves small so they don't upset the established order. Most of them will live their entire lives that way, invisible, unremarkable, forgotten the moment they're gone. His hand slid down her arms, leaving trails of heat. Or you can decide that you're done following rules made by people who don't care about you. You can decide that your worth isn't determined by their recognition. You can decide to take what you want instead of waiting for permission to want it. Seraphina leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. And what do I want? That's for you to decide. His lips brushed the shell of her ear, sending electricity down her spine. But I can tell you what I want. What? You. In my life, in my space, in my world. I want to watch you realize how extraordinary you are. I want to be there when you stop making yourself small and start demanding the recognition you deserve. His arms wrapped around her waist, holding her against him. I want to give you everything you've been denied, and watch you transform into the woman you were always meant to be. Seraphina turned in his arms, tilting her head back to look at him. That's a lot to promise someone you barely know. I know enough. I know you're brilliant and undervalued. I know you're stronger than you think. I know you have the capacity to build something remarkable if someone would just give you the chance. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. And I know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I saw you standing on that terrace, looking like you were trying to disappear. I was trying to disappear. I know, but you can't. Not anymore. He lowered his head, his lips hovering just above hers. Not now that I've seen you. When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle like on the rooftop. It was consuming, demanding, the kiss of a man who knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to take it. Seraphina kissed him back with equal hunger, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, wanting to erase every inch of space between them. They broke apart, breathing hard, and Adrian rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said roughly. Tonight. Stay with me. Every rational thought screamed warnings. Too fast, too soon, too intense. But Seraphina was done listening to the voice that told her to play it safe. Okay, she whispered. That night, wrapped in expensive sheets in Adrian's bed, the city glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, Seraphina felt something shift inside her. Not just the physical intimacy, though that had been revelation enough. The way he touched her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was worth savoring. But something deeper. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Completely, utterly, devastatingly seen. And it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through windows and the smell of coffee. Adrian stood at the kitchen island, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. He was fully dressed, all business, but when he saw her watching from the bedroom doorway, his expression softened. He ended the call mid-sentence. "Good morning." He crossed to her, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." It was true. No nightmares, no anxiety, just deep, dreamless sleep. "Do you always speak Italian on the phone?" "Only when I don't want people listening to understand what I'm saying." He kissed her forehead, casual and affectionate, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "I have meetings today. Business I can't reschedule. But tonight, I have work too," Seraphina reminded him. "Some of us have jobs that require regular attendance." "Quit," she laughed, thinking he was joking. But his expression remained serious. "I'm not joking. Quit. That job is destroying you slowly. You're brilliant, capable, organized. You could be running your own company instead of making Catherine Whitmore look competent." "Adrian, I can't just quit. I have rent, expenses, student loans. I'll cover it." He said it like it was nothing. "Whatever you need until you figure out what you actually want to do." Seraphina pulled back, coffee sloshing dangerously in her cup. "I've known you for a week. I'm not letting you pay my bills." "Why not?" "Because that's not how this works. I'm not some," she searched for the right word, "some kept woman who trades independence for financial security." Adrian's expression shifted, something like respect flickering in his dark eyes. "Good. I'd be disappointed if you'd said yes that easily." He took her coffee cup, set it on the counter, and pulled her against him. "But the offer stands. Not because I think you need me to take care of you, but because I hate watching talented people waste themselves on jobs that don't value them." "I'll think about it." It was a lie. She wouldn't, couldn't. Independence was all she had. But the fact that he'd offered, that he'd seen her worth, even if her employers didn't, made something warm bloom in her chest. Over the next 2 weeks, Seraphina fell into a pattern she'd never experienced before. Work during the day, still invisible, still undervalued, but somehow it bothered her less when she knew Adrian would be waiting when she was done. Evenings with him, dinners at restaurants she'd never heard of, walks through the city at midnight when the streets were quieter, conversations that ranged from philosophical to absurd. And slowly, carefully, he introduced her to his world. Not all at once, not overwhelming her, but piece by piece, showing her the infrastructure of his life. The first time she met one of his associates, it was at a gallery opening in Chelsea. Marcus something, she didn't catch the last name, tall and broad-shouldered with a Russian accent and hands that looked like they could break bones without effort. "So you're the one who's got Adrian distracted," Marcus said, kissing her hand with old-world formality. "I was beginning to think he was incapable of focusing on anything other than business." "Marcus handles security for several of my clients," Adrian explained, his hand at the small of Seraphina's back. "He's also the only person I trust to watch my back in a fight." "There are fights?" Seraphina kept her voice light, but she was watching both men carefully. "Metaphorical ones, usually." Marcus's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Though occasionally literal, Adrian has a talent for making enemies." "I have a talent for protecting my interests," Adrian corrected. "People mistake that for aggression." "Because it often involves aggression." Marcus turned back to Seraphina. "Has he told you what he does? Really does?" "Some." She met the bigger man's gaze steadily. "Enough to know it's complicated." Diplomatic answer. "I like her, Adrian. She's smarter than the last one." "There wasn't a last one," Adrian said sharply. "Not in any way that matters." Something passed between the two men, some unspoken communication that Seraphina couldn't quite read. Then Marcus smiled again, genuine this time. "My apologies. I'm testing you, and that's unfair. Adrian speaks very highly of you, which is unusual. He rarely speaks of anyone at all." "Because most people aren't worth speaking about," Adrian said. "Seraphina is an exception." They moved through the gallery, looking at art that Seraphina suspected was being used to launder money or move assets, or whatever wealthy people with questionable business practices did with expensive paintings. Adrian introduced her to more associates. A woman named Elena, who did something with international finance. A quiet man called James, who apparently specialized in corporate acquisitions. A couple who owned several restaurants and spoke about shipping logistics with the kind of detail that suggested they were moving more than just food supplies. Everyone was polite. Everyone was curious. And everyone, Seraphina noticed, treated Adrian with a combination of respect and wariness that suggested his power went deeper than he'd revealed. On the way home, she still thought of her apartment as home, though she'd spent more nights at Adrian's place than her own lately. She finally asked, "How dangerous is your life? Really?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, the city lights sliding across his face as the car moved through traffic. "Dangerous enough that I have security I haven't told you about. Dangerous enough that I'm very careful about who knows where I live and how to reach me. Dangerous enough that bringing you into it makes you a potential target." He turned to look at her, "Which is why I need you to understand what you're getting into." And what am I getting into? A world where loyalty matters more than law, where power is currency and information is leverage, where the people I do business with are sometimes criminals and sometimes completely legitimate, and telling the difference isn't always easy. His hand found hers in the darkness. "I can protect you. I will protect you. But I need you to be aware of the risks." Seraphina thought about her safe, invisible life. Her apartment in Brooklyn. Her job where she was undervalued. Her future that looked exactly like her present, stretching out in a straight line of careful mediocrity. Then she thought about the past 2 weeks. Feeling seen, feeling valued, feeling like she mattered. "What kind of risks?" she asked. "People who might try to get to me through you. Situations that could become dangerous if they go wrong. A life that doesn't fit into normal categories." He squeezed her hand. "I won't lie to you, Seraphina. Being with me means accepting a certain level of uncertainty, as opposed to the absolute certainty of my current life, where I can be certain I'll be invisible and undervalued forever." "Fair point." The almost smile appeared. "So you're not running away screaming?" "Should I be?" "Probably. Most sensible people would." "Then it's a good thing I'm done being sensible." Seraphina leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Show me the rest of it, your world. All of it." "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm sure I don't want to go back to who I was before I met you." Adrian pulled her closer, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "Then I'll show you everything, but slowly, one piece at a time, until you understand exactly what you're choosing. And if I decide it's too much, then I'll let you go." His voice was quiet but firm. "I want you in my life, Seraphina, but not if it costs you your safety or your peace. You get to choose, always." But even as he said it, Seraphina knew the choice was already made. She had spent 28 years being invisible, and Adrian Morelli had taught her what it felt like to be seen. There was no going back from that, no returning to her small life, her small apartment, her small dreams. She was done being small. Whatever came next, danger or uncertainty or stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, she was choosing it. She was choosing him, and for the first time in her life, she was choosing herself. 2 days later, everything changed. Seraphina was leaving Adrian's building after spending the night, heading to work, when a black car pulled up to the curb. Not a taxi, not a rideshare, just a sleek black sedan with tinted windows that screamed money and power. The back door opened. "Ms. Vale," a man in an expensive suit gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Please, we need to talk." Every instinct screamed danger. But before she could move, another car pulled up behind the first, and another behind that. She was surrounded. "Who are you?" she demanded, proud that her voice didn't shake. "A friend of Adrian's, more or less." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Get in the car, Ms. Vale, or my associates will help you in, and that would be unfortunate for everyone." Seraphina looked around. Early morning, few pedestrians, no one close enough to help if she screamed. And these men, she counted 4 now, plus drivers, they had the look of people who were very good at making problems disappear. She got in the car. The man beside her smelled like expensive cologne and menace. He was probably in his early 40s, handsome in a way that felt manufactured, with slicked back dark hair and eyes that assessed her like she was a commodity to be appraised. "Luca Moretti," he said, extending his hand like they were at a cocktail party instead of in a car she'd been forced into. "Adrian's cousin." Seraphina didn't take his hand. If you're family, why the intimidation tactics? Because Adrian has always been territorial about his possessions, and I needed to ensure we could have this conversation without interruption. Luca withdrew his hand, unbothered by her refusal. You're very beautiful. I can see why he's distracted. I'm not a possession, and Adrian isn't distracted. No? Luca's smile widened. Then why has he been ignoring business calls for the past 2 weeks? Why has he turned down 3 very lucrative opportunities because they would require travel? Why has Marcus reported that Adrian leaves meetings early, skips security briefings, and spends every available moment with a woman he met at a charity gala? The detail in his knowledge made Seraphina's skin crawl. You've been watching us. I've been watching Adrian. You're just the current object of his fascination. Luca pulled out his phone, swiped through several screens, then turned it toward her. Do you know what these are? Seraphina looked at the images, documents, contracts, photographs of men who looked dangerous meeting in shadowy locations. No. Records of Adrian's business dealings over the past 10 years. Import-export, he calls it. Private security consulting. Luca's voice dripped contempt. Pretty names for ugly work. Arms trafficking, extortion, money laundering. Your boyfriend isn't some gray area businessman, Ms. Vale. He's a criminal who's very good at hiding what he does. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me. The evidence speaks for itself. Luca swiped to another image. Adrian meeting with men in suits, briefcases being exchanged, money visible in open cases. He's built his empire on violence and exploitation, and now he's brought you into it, probably without telling you the truth about what he really is. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. What do you want? I want you to understand what you've gotten yourself into. I want you to know that Adrian Morelli isn't some romantic figure who sees your hidden worth. He's a predator who's chosen you for reasons you don't understand yet. Luca leaned closer, and she fought the urge to pull away. And I want you to deliver a message. I'm not your messenger. You are if you want to walk away from this car without complications. His voice hardened. Tell Adrian that I'm done being patient. Tell him that the territory in Red Hook belongs to me by right, and his continued interference will have consequences. Tell him. Luca's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to hurt, that I know about you now, and that makes you leverage. Fear spiked through her, sharp and cold. Let go of me. When you've heard everything. His grip tightened. Adrian thinks he's untouchable. He thinks because he's careful, because he's smart, because he has Marcus and his other loyal dogs that no one can hurt him. But everyone has weaknesses, Ms. Vale. And you're his. He'll kill you for this. The words came out before she could stop them. Luca laughed, releasing her wrist. He'll try. That's the point. Adrian has been consolidating power for years, pushing out the old families, taking territory that isn't his. It's time someone pushed back. And you, he tapped her bruised wrist. You're the perfect catalyst. You're going to use me to start a war. I'm going to use you to end one. Adrian will come for you because that's what he does. Protects his possessions, defends his territory, and when he does, he'll be vulnerable, emotional, reckless. Luca's smile was sharp enough to cut. And I'll be waiting. The car pulled to a stop. Seraphina looked out the window and realized with a jolt that they were only 2 blocks from Adrian's building, like the entire conversation had happened in the space of a brief drive around the neighborhood. Get out, Luca said. Deliver my message. And Ms. Vale, if you're smart, you'll disappear before this gets ugly. Adrian might survive what's coming. You won't. Seraphina got out of the car on shaking legs, watching as it pulled away into traffic. Her wrist throbbed where Luca had gripped it, and her mind raced with everything she'd just learned. Arms trafficking, money laundering, violence. Adrian had told her his business operated in gray areas. He'd warned her about danger, about people who might try to use her to get to him. But this, photographs of weapons, evidence of crimes, a cousin who spoke about war like it was inevitable. This was something else entirely. She should run. Should go to her apartment, pack her things, disappear into some other city where men like Adrian Morelli and Luca Moretti didn't exist. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't. Because Adrian had seen her when no one else had. Because he'd made her feel like she mattered. Because whatever he was, Whatever he'd done, he'd been honest about the darkness in his world, even if he hadn't revealed all the details. And because Luca Moretti had threatened her, had grabbed her, had tried to use her as a weapon, and Seraphina was done being a tool in other people's games, she pulled out her phone and called Adrian. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. Dinner tonight? There's this place in the village. I was just in a car with your cousin Luca," Seraphina interrupted. "He says he's done being patient about Red Hook territory. He says I'm leverage. He says there's going to be a war." The silence on the other end was absolute and terrible. "Where are you right now?" Adrian's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the warmth completely stripped away. "2 blocks from your building." He grabbed my wrist, showed me pictures of you doing illegal things, and told me to deliver a message. "Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming to you." He hung up before she could respond. 90 seconds later, a black SUV screeched to a stop beside her. The door flew open and Adrian emerged, followed immediately by Marcus. Both men looked dangerous in a way she'd never seen before, all sharp edges and controlled violence. Adrian's hands were on her face, tilting her head, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Did anyone else?" "Just my wrist." He grabbed it to make a point. Seraphina held up her arm, showing the red marks that were already darkening to bruises. "Adrian, what the hell is going on?" His expression went dark and murderous. "Get in the car, both of you. We need to move." Marcus was already scanning the street, hand inside his jacket, where Seraphina assumed he kept a gun. "Could be surveillance, could be a setup." "I don't care. Get her somewhere safe. Now." They bundled her into the SUV, Marcus driving while Adrian sat in the back with her, his arm around her shoulders like he could shield her with his body alone. "Explain," Seraphina demanded. "All of it. No more vague answers about gray areas and complicated business. Tell me the truth." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "Luca is my cousin, but we're not family in any meaningful sense. We grew up in the same world, Chicago, the South Side, the kinds of neighborhoods where power matters more than law. Our uncle Lorenzo ran things for years. When he died, there was supposed to be a transition plan. Luca would take Chicago, I would take New York, clean division, no conflict. But it didn't work out that way," Seraphina guessed. "Luca wanted both, wanted everything. He's always been greedy, always believed he deserved more than he earned." Adrian's hand found hers, his thumb automatically moving to her bruised wrist, gentle now, where Luca had been brutal. "I came to New York 10 years ago with nothing, built my business from the ground up, earned every connection, every territory, every dollar, and Luca can't stand that I succeeded without him." "The territory in Red Hook," Seraphina said. "What is it really?" "Shipping access, import routes, control over what comes into the city through that particular port." Adrian met her eyes. "I told you I move things for people who need discretion. Red Hook is how I do that, and Luca wants it because taking it would cripple my operation." "And the photographs he showed me? The weapons, the money, the meetings in dark places?" "Probably real. Some of them, anyway." Adrian didn't flinch from the admission. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Seraphina. Made deals with dangerous people. Facilitated transactions that exist in legal gray areas and sometimes cross into illegal territory. But I don't traffic weapons. I don't hurt innocent people. And I don't deal in anything that exploits the vulnerable." "But you've killed people." She said it as a statement, not a question. "Yes." No hesitation, no justification, just the truth. "In self-defense, in protection of people I care about. Never in cold blood, never for sport, but yes, I've killed." Marcus pulled the SUV into an underground parking garage that required 3 different security codes to access. They were somewhere in Manhattan, but Seraphina had lost track of exactly where during the tense drive. "Safe house," Adrian explained as they got out. "No one knows about this place except Marcus and 2 other people I trust completely. You'll stay here until I can neutralize the threat." "Neutralize," Seraphina repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'm going to have a conversation with Luca. Make it clear that you're off limits. Make it clear that threatening you was the biggest mistake he's ever made." "And if he doesn't listen?" Adrian's expression went cold and hard. "Then I'll make sure he can't threaten anyone ever again." The safe house was a converted loft, smaller than Adrian's place, but still luxurious. Marcus swept through it with professional efficiency, checking rooms, securing windows, doing whatever it was that security specialists did to ensure safety. "All clear," he announced. "I'll be outside. No one gets past me." After Marcus left, Adrian and Seraphina stood in the middle of the empty living room, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. "I should have told you everything from the beginning," Adrian said quietly. "Should have explained exactly what my world looks like, what the risks were, what you were getting into. I was selfish. I wanted you in my life, and I was afraid if you knew the full truth, you'd run." "You were probably right." Seraphina wrapped her arms around herself. "If you told me on that first night that you'd killed people, that you had dangerous enemies, that being with you might mean getting grabbed off the street and threatened, I would have run, fast and far. And now?" She thought about Luca's cold eyes, his bruising grip, his certainty that she was just a possession to be used as leverage. Thought about the photographs of weapons and money, evidence of a life she didn't fully understand. Thought about the fear that had spiked through her when those black cars surrounded her. Then she thought about the past few weeks. Adrian seeing her when no one else had, making her feel valued, teaching her what it meant to take up space. "Now I'm angry," she said. "Angry that your cousin thinks he can use me as a weapon. Angry that he grabbed me and threatened me and treated me like I don't matter. Angry that he assumed I'd be scared enough to run." Adrian's expression shifted, something like pride flickering in his dark eyes. "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified. But I'm also done letting other people decide my worth. Done letting men treat me like I'm invisible or disposable." She stepped closer to him, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. "You asked me what I wanted. I want to matter. I want to take up space, and I'm not going to do that by running away from the first real challenge I've faced. Seraphina, this isn't a challenge. This is dangerous. Luca won't stop with threats. If he thinks he can use you to get to me, he will. And Adrian's voice cracked slightly. "I can't lose you. Not when I just found you. Then don't lose me. Fight for me. Protect me. But don't lock me away in a safe house and expect me to sit quietly while you handle everything." She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm not a possession to be protected, Adrian. I'm a partner. Treat me like one." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "You're extraordinary," he said roughly. "And you're right. You deserve to know everything, to be part of the decisions that affect your life." He pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders. "Luca wants Red Hook. If I give it to him, the threat to you disappears. If I don't, this escalates into something ugly." "What do you want to do?" "I want to protect what's mine. And I don't just mean territory." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "But I won't risk you for business. If choosing you means giving up Red Hook, I'll do it. And if I told you not to? If I said I want you to fight for what you've built? Then I'd ask why you're willing to risk your safety for shipping access and import routes." Seraphina was quiet for a moment, trying to articulate the feeling that had been building since Luca's car. "Because I spent my entire life being invisible, being told I didn't matter, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps I was given. And then you showed up and told me I deserved to take up space, that I had worth beyond what other people decided I had. And now your cousin thinks he can make me disappear again by scaring me, by showing me that your world is dangerous and assuming I'll run." She stepped back, squaring her shoulders. "I'm not running. I'm not going back to being invisible. And I'm not going to let Luca Moretti or anyone else decide what I'm capable of handling." Adrian studied her for a long moment, and she could see him reassessing, recalculating, understanding that she meant every word. "Okay," he said finally. "Then we do this together. But you need to understand what that means. Luca won't just threaten you again. He'll escalate. This could get violent, dangerous, possibly deadly." "I understand." "Do you?" Adrian moved closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. "Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be part of my world completely. All of it. The business, the danger, the moral complexity. You won't be able to claim ignorance or innocence. You'll be choosing this. Choosing me. Choosing a life that exists outside conventional rules." "I'm choosing it," Seraphina said firmly. "All of it. The darkness and the danger and the moral complexity. Because the alternative is going back to my invisible life, and I'd rather face danger with you than safety alone. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. The last wall coming down, the final reservation disappearing. He pulled her against him, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. Then we end this, he said quietly. Permanently. No more threats. No more leverage. No more Luca thinking he can use you to get to me. How? I'm going to arrange a meeting, neutral territory, just me and Luca, face to face, settling this the old way. His voice was cold now, all business. And when it's done, you'll be safe. I promise you that. Marcus returned an hour later with food, clean clothes for Seraphina, and a laptop that Adrian immediately opened and began typing on. Watching him work was fascinating. The intensity of his focus, the rapid-fire texts and calls in multiple languages, the way he orchestrated complex arrangements with the efficiency of a chess master. Warehouse in Red Hook, he announced finally. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Neutral ground that Luca will accept because it's the territory we're fighting over. I'll bring Marcus and 2 others. Luca will bring the same. We talk, we settle this, we end it. And if talking doesn't work? Seraphina asked. Adrian and Marcus exchanged a look that made her stomach clench. Then we end it anyway, Marcus said bluntly, just with more blood. The next 24 hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Adrian barely left the laptop, making arrangements, calling in favors, ensuring that every possible angle was covered. Seraphina watched him transform from the man who'd made her dinner and taught her about taking up space into someone harder, colder, more dangerous. This was the side of him she hadn't fully seen before, the side that had built an empire through calculation and controlled violence, the side that could look at potential bloodshed with the dispassionate efficiency of a strategist planning a campaign. You should eat something, she said quietly, bringing him a plate of food Marcus had ordered. Adrian looked up from the laptop, and for a moment he seemed startled to see her there. Then his expression softened slightly. Thank you. He pulled her into his lap and she settled against him, feeling the tension in his body. Are you sure about this? There's still time to back out. I can send you somewhere safe, somewhere Luca will never find you. I'm not going anywhere. Seraphina turned to look at him. You're stuck with me. Good. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Because I don't want to do this without you anymore. Any of it. That night, lying in bed in the safe house, Seraphina stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Violence, probably. Danger, certainly. Maybe even death, though Adrian had assured her he had no intention of dying and leaving her alone. What are you thinking? Adrian's voice came from the darkness beside her. That I should be more scared than I am. That normal people don't end up in safe houses waiting for warehouse confrontations with dangerous criminals. That my life has become completely unrecognizable in the span of 3 weeks. Regrets? No. She turned to face him, able to make out his features in the dim light filtering through the windows. That's what's strange. I should regret this. Should wish I'd never met you, never got into your car, never said yes to dinner. But I don't. Why not? Because for the first time in my life, I'm not invisible. I matter. And I'd rather matter in a dangerous world than disappear in a safe one. Adrian pulled her against him, and they lay tangled together in the darkness, holding each other like they could ward off whatever tomorrow would bring through proximity alone. The warehouse in Red Hook was exactly what Seraphina had imagined when she thought of places where criminal confrontations happened. Cavernous and dark, smelling of salt water and rust, with broken windows that let in the cold spring wind off the harbor. Adrian had insisted she stay at the safe house, but she'd been equally insistent about coming, and eventually he'd conceded with the condition that she stay in the car with one of his security team until he gave the all-clear. So she sat in the back of a black SUV with a man named Thomas, who looked like he could bench press a small car, watching through tinted windows as Adrian, Marcus, and 2 other men approached the warehouse entrance. Luca was already there with his own contingent, 4 men instead of the agreed-upon 3, Seraphina noted. That probably wasn't a good sign. Can you hear what they're saying? She asked Thomas. He tapped a small earpiece. Audio feed. Want me to put it on speaker? Yes. The voices crackled through the car's sound system, echoing slightly from the warehouse's acoustics. You brought an extra man, Adrian's voice, cold and controlled. That wasn't the agreement. Neither was bringing your girlfriend to a business meeting. Luca's voice was mocking. Is she watching from somewhere? Does she know what you're really capable of? This is between us, Luca. Leave her out of it. I would have, if you'd been reasonable about Red Hook. But you've always been greedy, Adrian. Always taken more than your share. Always thought you were smarter, better, more deserving than the rest of us. I earned what I have. You've spent 10 years making excuses for why you haven't. The sound of footsteps, someone moving. Seraphina leaned forward, straining to see through the warehouse windows. Earned, Luca spat. You stole territory from families that had held it for generations. You undercut prices, manipulated markets, bought off officials who were supposed to stay neutral. You built your empire on betrayal, and you have the audacity to claim you earned it? I built my empire on being better at this than you are. That's not betrayal. That's competition. Then let's compete. Luca's voice took on an edge that made Seraphina's skin crawl. Red Hook for Red Hook. You keep your territory, I'll take mine. But first, you give me the girl. Silence. Terrible, absolute silence. Then Adrian laughed, and it was the coldest sound Seraphina had ever heard. No. I'm not asking, cousin. I'm telling you, the girl is my price for leaving Red Hook alone. You want to keep your shipping routes? Give me Seraphina Vale. I'd burn Red Hook to the ground before I gave her to you. Then we have a problem. The sound of metal on leather, guns being drawn. Because I'm not leaving here without one or the other. Thomas, Seraphina said urgently, we need to… The explosion cut her off. One of the warehouse windows blew outward in a shower of glass and flame. Gunfire erupted, rapid and deafening, even through the car's soundproofing. Seraphina watched in horror as figures moved inside the warehouse. Impossible to tell who was winning, who was even still alive. Stay in the car, Thomas ordered, his hand on his weapon. Mr. Morelli was very clear. Mr. Morelli might be dying in there. Seraphina reached for the door handle. Thomas's hand shot out, stopping her. He'd kill me if I let you go in there. Ma'am, please, let us handle this. But even as he spoke, the warehouse doors burst open and men poured out. Marcus supporting Adrian, who was bleeding from his shoulder. 2 other men providing cover fire as they ran toward the SUVs. Drive! Marcus shouted as he bundled Adrian into the back. Now! The SUV peeled out, tires screaming, as more gunfire erupted behind them. Seraphina threw herself across the seat to Adrian, her hands immediately going to the wound on his shoulder. Vest caught most of it, he managed, his face pale but his eyes clear. Luca had explosives rigged. Bastard was planning to kill us all from the start. Where is he now? Marcus demanded from the front seat, speaking into his phone in rapid Russian. Still in the warehouse. Maybe dead, maybe not. I put 3 rounds in him before the explosion. Adrian winced as the car hit a pothole. But I didn't confirm the kill. Then we have to assume he's still a threat, Marcus said grimly. They drove to a private clinic in Queens, not a hospital, somewhere that wouldn't ask questions about gunshot wounds or report them to authorities. A doctor who looked like she'd seen worse appeared immediately, guiding Adrian into a treatment room while Seraphina stood outside, her hand shaking, her mind replaying the explosion over and over. This was real. The danger wasn't theoretical anymore. Adrian had been shot. Luca had tried to kill them all. And this was her life now, warehouse confrontations and gunfire and watching the man she was falling in love with bleed in the back of an SUV. Ms. Vale? Marcus appeared beside her, his expression grim. You should sit down. You're in shock. I'm fine. You're not, but I respect that you're trying to be. He guided her to a chair in the waiting area. For what it's worth, you were right to insist on coming. If you'd stayed at the safe house, we wouldn't have been able to extract as quickly. You being nearby gave Adrian motivation to end it fast. Is he going to be okay? The shoulder wound is clean. Through and through, missed the bone. He'll heal. Marcus paused. But the situation with Luca isn't over. If he survived, he'll come back. Men like him always do. Then what do? We prepare, we secure our positions. And we make sure that next time we finish what we started. The doctor emerged 20 minutes later. He's stable. The wound is clean. I've stitched it and given him antibiotics. He needs rest. No strenuous activity for at least a week. and he'll have limited mobility in that shoulder for a month. Can I see him? He's been asking for you since I started stitching. Adrian was sitting up on the examination table, his shoulder wrapped in clean white bandages, his face still pale, but his eyes alert. When Seraphina entered, his expression softened. "Hey," he said quietly. "You okay?" She almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. He'd been shot, and he was asking if she was okay. "You're bleeding and asking about me?" "Always." He reached for her with his good arm, pulling her against him carefully. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Sorry you're part of this now. I chose to be part of it." Seraphina pulled back just enough to look at him. "What happens now?" "Now we find out if Luca survived. If he did, we end this properly. If he didn't," Adrian's expression hardened, "then we deal with whoever comes after him." "There will always be someone coming after you, won't there?" "Probably. That's the cost of power. The price of taking up space in a world where other people want the same thing." His hand came up to cup her face. "But I'll protect you. I swear it. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, you'll be safe." Seraphina leaned into his touch, feeling the truth of his words and the weight of what they meant. This was her life now. Danger and violence and loving a man who operated outside conventional rules. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "We should go," Marcus said from the doorway. "I've got word that Luca was taken to a hospital in Brooklyn. Critical condition, but alive. Which means we have a narrow window to either finish this or negotiate." Adrian stood carefully, wincing at the movement. "Then we negotiate. On my terms this time." 2 hours later, they stood in a hospital room where Luca Moretti lay in a bed surrounded by machines, his chest wrapped in bandages, his face gray with pain and morphine. His men had been positioned outside, but Marcus had negotiated a brief private conversation between the cousins. Seraphina had insisted on coming. If this was her life now, she wanted to face it directly. "You look terrible," Adrian said, standing at the foot of Luca's bed. "You shot me 3 times. Luca's voice was weak, but still carried its familiar edge of contempt. "You rigged explosives in a warehouse and tried to kill everyone. I'd say we're even." Adrian moved closer, and despite his own injuries, he radiated controlled danger. "Here's what's going to happen, Luca. You're going to disappear. Back to Chicago, out to California, overseas, I don't care. But you're leaving New York, and you're never coming back." "Or what?" "Or next time I put bullets in you, I make sure you don't survive to reach a hospital." Adrian's voice was flat, matter of fact. "I've tolerated your interference because we're family. Because Uncle Lorenzo would have wanted me to give you chances. But you threatened Seraphina. You put her in a car, grabbed her, tried to use her as leverage. That crosses every line that matters to me." Luca's eyes found Seraphina, standing behind Adrian. "So, she's special. The woman who tamed Adrian Morelli. How long until he gets bored and moves on to the next one?" "That's not going to happen," Adrian said quietly. "Because she's not just special, she's everything. And if you ever threaten her again, if you even think about her, I will end you. Not as business, not as strategy, as a promise." Something in Adrian's tone must have convinced Luca this wasn't negotiable. His expression shifted, the contempt fading into something that might have been resignation. "Fine, I'll leave New York, but Red Hook is mine, all of it. You get nothing except your life." Adrian leaned down, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And cousin, consider yourself lucky. Because the only reason you're still breathing is that I don't want Seraphina's first real experience of my world to include watching me commit murder. But that mercy has an expiration date. Cross me again, and I won't hesitate." They left the hospital as dawn was breaking over Brooklyn, the city slowly waking to a new day. Adrian leaned heavily on Seraphina as they walked to the car, exhaustion and pain finally catching up with him. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "For now. Luca will leave if he's smart. And if he's not," Adrian's expression hardened, "then we'll finish this permanently." Marcus drove them back to Adrian's loft, and Seraphina helped him into bed, carefully avoiding his injured shoulder. She should have been exhausted. She'd been awake for over 30 hours, had witnessed an explosion and shooting, had stood in a hospital room while Adrian threatened to commit murder. But she felt strangely energized, like she'd stepped through some threshold and emerged transformed on the other side. "You're different," Adrian said, watching her from the bed. Something changed. Everything changed. Seraphina sat beside him, taking his hand. "I'm not who I was before I met you. I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not small or afraid or waiting for permission to exist. I'm someone who rides to warehouse confrontations and stands by while you negotiate with dangerous men and chooses this life even though it's terrifying." "Any regrets?" She thought about the past few weeks. The white rose, the dinners, the rooftop view, the warehouse explosion, the blood and fear and choices that couldn't be unmade. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." Adrian pulled her down beside him, and despite his injuries, despite the danger that still lurked at the edges of their lives, he smiled. "Then we build from here," he said. "Together. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners." "Partners?" Seraphina agreed, settling carefully against his uninjured side. And as the morning light filled the loft, as the city came alive outside the windows, she felt something slot into place inside her, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of finally knowing exactly where she was supposed to be. She had stepped into Adrian's dangerous world, and instead of drowning, she'd learned to swim. Now she was ready for whatever came next. Adrian's recovery was slower than either of them wanted. The shoulder wound healed cleanly, but the damage went deeper than torn muscle and shattered tissue. He'd pushed himself too hard for too long, and his body was demanding payment for years of operating on adrenaline and ruthless efficiency. Seraphina took a leave of absence from the Blackwood Foundation, not because Adrian asked her to, but because showing up at work 2 days after a warehouse shootout felt absurd when her entire world had shifted on its axis. Catherine Whitmore had sounded almost relieved on the phone, probably happy to have one less person around to witness her incompetence. "You should quit," Adrian said for the third time that week, watching from the couch as Seraphina made coffee in his industrial kitchen. "That job is killing you slowly. You're worth more than being Catherine's invisible assistant." "I know." Seraphina brought him his coffee, settling beside him carefully to avoid jostling his shoulder. "I'm going to. I just need to figure out what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" It was the question she'd been asking herself for days. Before Adrian, the answer would have been simple. Another nonprofit job, maybe with better pay and slightly more recognition, the same careful trajectory toward modest success and persistent invisibility. But now, after everything that had happened, the old answer felt like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm good at organizing things, at seeing what needs to be done and making it happen. But I don't want to do it for people who don't value me. I don't want to build other people's dreams while mine gather dust." "Then what are your dreams?" Adrian's good hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers with the easy intimacy they'd developed over weeks of proximity and crisis. "The real ones, not the safe ones you convinced yourself to want." Seraphina was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over in her mind. What did she actually want? Not what seemed reasonable or achievable or appropriate for someone with her background and resources. What did she want? "I want to help people," she said slowly, "but not the way the Blackwood Foundation does it. Throwing money at problems from a safe distance, hosting galas to congratulate themselves for caring. I want to actually do something that matters, something that reaches the kids I used to be, the ones in foster care who feel invisible, who think they don't deserve better, who need someone to tell them they're worth more than the system says they are." Adrian was watching her with that intensity that still made her pulse quicken. "Keep going. I want to create opportunities, education, mentorship, connections to people who can show them different possibilities. I want to give them what I never had. Someone who sees them, who believes in them, who invests in their potential instead of just managing their placement." The words were coming faster now, passion bleeding into her voice. "I want to build something that actually changes lives instead of just making donors feel good about themselves." "A foundation," Adrian said. "Your own foundation." "I don't have the money for that. Foundations require capital, infrastructure, legal frameworks." "I have money." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious solution in the world. "More than I can spend in several lifetimes, and most of it came from morally ambiguous sources that could use some redemption through legitimate charitable work." Seraphina pulled back slightly. Adrian, I can't just take your money and start a foundation. Why not? Because it's yours. Because I'm not a charity case. Because she struggled to articulate the discomfort she felt. Because I need to build something that's mine, not something you gave me. What if we built it together? Adrian shifted carefully, turning to face her more fully. You have the vision, the experience, the understanding of what these kids need. I have resources, connections, the ability to navigate legal and financial complexity. We could be partners in this. Real partners. Not just you working for me. You want to start a foundation? You, who told me you don't believe charity fixes systemic problems? I don't. But I believe in you, and I believe that if anyone could create something that actually makes a difference, it's you. His dark eyes held hers. Besides, I need to start legitimizing my operations anyway. Luca made that clear. Having a prominent charitable foundation would help with that transition. So I'd be helping you launder your reputation. You'd be changing lives. The fact that it also helps me is just a bonus. Adrian's mouth quirked in that almost smile she loved. Think about it. No more Catherine Whitmore taking credit for your work. No more standing in corners at galas you organized. You'd be the face of it, the voice, the decision maker. I'd handle the money and legal infrastructure, but the vision would be yours. The possibility opened up in front of her like a door she hadn't known existed. Her own foundation, real power to make real change. The ability to help kids like she'd been, to give them opportunities and visibility and the sense that they mattered. I'll think about it, she said quietly. That's all I ask. 3 days later, Marcus appeared at the loft with news that made Adrian's expression go dark and dangerous. Luca left the hospital yesterday, disappeared before the doctors cleared him for discharge. We've got eyes on the usual locations, but he's gone underground. Well, where would he go? Seraphina asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be comforting. Chicago, most likely. Back to old connections, people who owe him favors. Marcus's expression was grim. Or he could stay local, gather resources for another attempt. Another attempt at what? But Seraphina knew that too. At Red Hook. At Adrian's operation. At revenge for what happened in the warehouse. Marcus turned to Adrian. We need to increase security. Move to a different location. Maybe get Seraphina somewhere. I'm not hiding, Seraphina interrupted. We've been through this. The situation has changed, Marcus said patiently. Luca leaving the hospital against medical advice suggests he's desperate. Desperate men make reckless choices. Or smart ones. Adrian stood carefully, his shoulders still limiting his movement but healing steadily. He knows I'll be watching for revenge, so he disappears, lets me think he's licking his wounds in Chicago, then comes back when my guard is down. Then we don't let our guard down, Seraphina said firmly. Both men looked at her and she felt the weight of their assessment. Marcus calculating whether she was a liability, Adrian torn between protecting her and respecting her choice to stay. I'm not going anywhere, she repeated. We face this together or not at all. Adrian's expression softened slightly. Then we do it smart. Enhanced security, limited public appearances, careful vetting of everyone who gets close. He turned to Marcus. Pull in additional team members. I want eyes on every approach to this building, monitors on all my business locations, and intel on every person Luca might contact for support. Already in progress. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like security reports. But there's something else you should know. The feds have been asking questions about the warehouse incident. Nothing direct yet, but they're sniffing around Red Hook, interviewing dock workers, pulling shipping manifests. Luca, Adrian said immediately. He must have made a deal before he disappeared, gave them something to buy protection or leverage. That's my assessment, which means we need to clean up Red Hook operations before they find anything actionable. Seraphina watched Adrian's expression shift through several calculations, assessing risk, weighing options, making the kind of strategic decisions that had built his empire in the first place. Start the transition, he said finally. Move everything questionable out of Red Hook. Shift to legitimate cargo only. It'll cost us in the short term, but it's better than federal charges. That's half your operation, Marcus said. Maybe more. You willing to give that up? Adrian's eyes found Seraphina's. I'm willing to give up whatever it takes to keep what matters most. The next 2 weeks were a study in controlled demolition. Seraphina watched as Adrian systematically dismantled the gray area portions of his business, severing connections with clients who operated in illegal spaces, redirecting shipping routes to exclude questionable cargo, turning down deals that even a year ago he would have considered standard practice. It was costing him. She could see it in the tension around his eyes, in the late-night phone calls where he negotiated exits from contracts, in the meetings with lawyers and accountants as they restructured his entire operation. "You don't have to do this," she said one night, finding him at his desk at 3 a.m, surrounded by documents and looking exhausted. "Not for me. I'm not doing it just for you." Adrian looked up, and despite the exhaustion, his gaze was clear. "I'm doing it because you made me realize I could. That there's a version of my life that doesn't require operating in shadows. That doesn't mean constantly looking over my shoulder. That doesn't end with me shot in a warehouse or arrested by feds. But you built all of this. Your empire, your power, your connections. You're giving it up." "I'm not giving it up. I'm transforming it." He reached for her hand, pulling her around the desk to stand between his knees. "The shipping company is still mine. The security business is still profitable. The real estate holdings are still generating income. I'm just removing the parts that make me vulnerable to people like Luca and investigations from federal agents. And the parts that made you who you are." "No." His hands settled on her hips, firm and possessive. "The parts that made me who I was. Before you. Before I realized that power built on questionable foundations is always at risk. Before I understood that having someone to protect is more valuable than having territory to control." Seraphina's throat tightened. "You're changing your entire life for me." "I'm changing my entire life for us, for the possibility of a future that doesn't involve warehouse shootouts and cousins trying to kill me, for the chance to build something legitimate that I can be proud of instead of just something profitable that I have to hide." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, settling into his lap carefully to avoid his healing shoulder. "You showed me I deserve to take up space, remember? Well, I want to take up space in a world that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. What if Luca comes back? What if other people see you legitimizing as weakness and try to take what you're giving up? Then I'll handle it, but on my terms, not theirs, and with you beside me, not hiding in some safe house while I fight battles alone." His lips found hers, gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "We're partners, Seraphina, in everything. Your foundation, my business transition, whatever challenges come next. We face them together." "Together," she agreed against his mouth. The call came 2 days later. Catherine Whitmore's assistant, sounding uncomfortable, informing Seraphina that her leave of absence had been extended indefinitely by mutual agreement, which was corporate speak for termination without the legal complications. Seraphina stared at her phone for a long moment, expecting to feel something, anger maybe, or fear about losing her income, or disappointment that years of work had ended with a passive-aggressive phone call from an assistant. Instead, she felt relief. "They fired me," she told Adrian, finding him in the kitchen making breakfast with one-handed efficiency that suggested he'd been practicing. "Good." He cracked eggs into a pan without looking up. "Saves you the trouble of quitting." "I should be upset." "Are you?" "No, that's what's strange. I should be worried about money, about my career, about what comes next. But mostly I just feel free." Adrian turned, leaning against the counter with a smile that was genuine and warm and nothing like the careful control he showed the rest of the world. "Then let's use that freedom. Start your foundation. Build something that matters. Show Catherine Whitmore and everyone else who made you invisible exactly what they lost when they failed to see you." Over the next month, Seraphina threw herself into creating something she'd never imagined possible. With Adrian's financial backing and Marcus's surprisingly helpful connections to lawyers who specialized in nonprofit work, she began building the infrastructure for what would become the Horizon Grant Initiative. The name came to her one morning, watching sunrise paint the sky through Adrian's floor-to-ceiling windows. Horizon, the line where Earth met sky, where the present met the future, where kids trapped in impossible circumstances could see possibilities beyond their current reality. She hired 3 people to start, a program director who'd grown up in foster care and understood the system's failures, a grants manager who knew how to identify organizations actually making a difference, and an administrative coordinator who'd worked for legitimate nonprofits and could navigate the legal complexity. Adrian gave her the top floor of a building he owned in Midtown, renovated to her specifications, all light and glass and open space that felt nothing like the cramped offices where she'd made herself small for years. "This is too much," she told him, standing in the empty space that would become her office. "It's exactly enough." He came up behind her, wrapping his good arm around her waist. "You're building something important. It deserves a space that reflects that." The first grant they funded went to an organization in Brooklyn that provided tutoring and mentorship for foster kids aging out of the system. Seraphina met with them personally, listening to their plans, asking questions, making sure the money would actually reach the kids who needed it most. When she told the program director that the Horizon Grant Initiative would fund them for 3 years at increasing levels based on measurable outcomes, the woman had tears in her eyes. "Do you know how rare this is?" she said. "Most foundations give us 1-year grants with impossible reporting requirements and then disappear. 3 years of guaranteed funding means we can actually plan, actually build something sustainable." "That's the point," Seraphina said quietly. "To give you what I never had: stability, investment, someone who believes in your work enough to commit for the long term." Walking out of that meeting, Seraphina felt something shift inside her. This was what taking up space actually meant. Not just refusing to be invisible, but actively making space for others. Using resources and power and privilege to lift up people who'd been pushed down by systems that didn't care about them. She was changing lives, and it felt better than anything she'd ever done before. Adrian's transition to legitimate business was messier and more complicated. Severing ties with questionable clients meant burning bridges with people who didn't accept rejection gracefully. Moving Red Hook operations to legal-only cargo meant losing significant income. And navigating the federal investigation that Marcus had warned about required lawyers and careful cooperation that grated against Adrian's instinct for control. But slowly, carefully, he was building something new from the ashes of his old empire. Seraphina watched him work with a mixture of admiration and concern. He was brilliant at this, identifying which parts of his operation could be salvaged, which connections could be maintained in legitimate forms, which risks were worth taking, and which needed to be eliminated entirely. But it was costing him. Not just financially, though she knew the numbers were staggering. It was costing him relationships with people who'd been loyal for years, territory he'd fought to acquire, the carefully constructed power structure that had defined his adult life. "Do you resent me?" she asked one night, finding him on the rooftop garden where they'd shared their first kiss. "For being the catalyst for all this change?" Adrian turned from his contemplation of the city, and in the ambient light she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight he was carrying. "No." He said it firmly, without hesitation. "I resent the system that forced me to build power through questionable means in the first place. I resent Luca for threatening you and forcing my hand on the timeline. I resent every circumstance that made me believe I had to operate in shadows to survive." He moved toward her, cupping her face in his hands. "But I don't resent you. You showed me there was another way, that I could have power without constant danger, success without moral compromise, a future without always looking over my shoulder. Even if it means giving up half of what you built, I'm not giving up anything that matters. Money? I have more than I need. Territory? I never wanted it for its own sake, just for the security it provided. Power? I'm learning that the power to build something legitimate is worth more than the power to operate outside the law." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You taught me that. You and your foundation, and watching you transform from invisible to essential. If you can rebuild yourself, I can rebuild my business." "We're both transforming," Seraphina said softly. "We are. Together. Exactly like we planned." The federal investigation intensified in early summer. Agents interviewed dock workers at Red Hook, pulled shipping records, questioned people who'd worked with Adrian over the years. Marcus coordinated with the lawyers, ensuring that every interaction was documented, that Adrian's cooperation was visible and complete, that the transition to legitimate operations was undeniable. "They're building a case," Marcus reported during one of their weekly security meetings. "But it's weak. Most of their evidence is from before the transition, And we've got documentation showing Adrian's cooperation, voluntary disclosure of problematic operations, and complete restructuring. Their best play is probably cutting a deal, immunity in exchange for information about other players. Which I won't give them, Adrian said flatly. I'm done with that world, but I'm not burning people to save myself. Even if it means charges? Even then, I won't become an informant. That's a line I won't cross. Marcus nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. Then we prepare for the possibility of indictment. Make sure everything is airtight, that your legitimate operations are completely separate from anything questionable, that there's no way to connect current business to past activities. Seraphina listened to them discuss legal strategy with the clinical efficiency of people who'd navigated dangerous situations before and felt her stomach clench with fear. Indictment meant trials. Trials meant publicity. Publicity meant her foundation getting dragged into Adrian's past, questioned about their connection, potentially destroyed before it could do the work she'd envisioned. Hey, Adrian must have seen something in her expression. This won't touch your foundation. I've made sure of that. The money I gave you is clean, filtered through legitimate sources, completely defensible. Even if they charge me, they can't touch the Horizon Grant Initiative. But they can touch you. Maybe, but probably not. We've been cooperative, we've restructured everything, and most importantly, we've got resources to fight this properly. He reached for her hand across the conference table. I'm not going to prison, Seraphina. I promise you that. You can't promise that. You don't control prosecutors or juries or... I control the narrative, I control the evidence, and I control my cooperation level. His grip on her hand tightened. Trust me, I've been navigating systems designed to destroy people like me my entire life. I know how to survive this. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his confidence was based on reality rather than bravado. But she'd seen how quickly situations could deteriorate. Warehouse explosions, gunshot wounds, cousins who disappeared and then returned with federal investigations in tow. The world Adrian had lived in for years didn't care about good intentions or legitimate transformations. It cared about leverage and power and destroying threats before they could destroy you. And despite everything he'd done to legitimize his operations, Adrian was still a threat to people whose empires depended on the shadows he was trying to leave behind. 2 weeks later, the indictment came. Not for Adrian directly, but for 3 of his former associates, people who'd worked with him in the gray area years, who'd facilitated questionable shipments and provided security for illegal operations. The charges were extensive: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to import controlled substances. Adrian's name appeared in the documentation 17 times. They're building toward you, the lead lawyer explained during an emergency meeting, using these 3 as stepping stones. If they flip any of them, if they can get testimony about your involvement, they'll bring charges. Will they flip? Seraphina asked, her voice steadier than she felt. One might. Carlo Romano. He's facing 20 years and he's got a family he wants to protect. If they offer him a deal, reduced sentence in exchange for testimony about Adrian's operation, he'll probably take it. Adrian's expression was unreadable. Carlo has been with me for 8 years. He knows where bodies are buried, figuratively and literally. If he talks, he can hurt me badly. Then we need to move first, Marcus said. Offer cooperation before they can leverage Carlo. Control the narrative. I told you I won't be an informant. I'm not suggesting you inform on anyone. I'm suggesting you tell your story, how you built your business, what you've done to legitimize it, why you're transitioning away from questionable operations. Make yourself sympathetic instead of threatening. Show them you're more valuable as a success story about rehabilitation than as a defendant in a racketeering case. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his expression cycling through calculations Seraphina had learned to recognize. Assessing risk, weighing options, trying to find the path that protected what mattered most. Set up a meeting, he said finally, with the prosecutors. I'll tell them my story, but I'm not giving them anyone else. That's non-negotiable. The meeting with federal prosecutors happened in a conference room in Lower Manhattan, all fluorescent lighting and cheap furniture and the institutional smell of government buildings everywhere. Adrian brought 3 lawyers and Marcus. Seraphina he'd tried to leave behind, but she'd insisted on coming, on being present for whatever happened next. The prosecutors were exactly what she expected. Young, ambitious, dressed in suits that tried to project authority, despite their obvious inexperience with cases this complex. They laid out their evidence with the careful pride of people who'd worked hard to build something they thought was airtight. And then Adrian dismantled it piece by piece. Yes, he'd operated in gray areas. Yes, he'd facilitated transactions that existed on the edge of legality. But he'd never trafficked weapons, never moved drugs, never hurt anyone who wasn't directly threatening him or his people. Everything he'd done had been about survival, in a world where conventional rules didn't apply to people from his background, and now he was trying to leave that world behind. He walked them through the business transition, the severed connections, the restructured operations, the legitimate enterprises he was building to replace questionable ones. He showed them documentation of his cooperation, his voluntary disclosures, his complete openness about past activities. "I'm not asking for immunity," Adrian said, his voice calm and controlled. "I'm not claiming I never crossed legal lines. I'm telling you that I'm trying to do better, and that prosecuting me now, when I'm actively transitioning to legitimate business, sends a message that redemption isn't possible. That once you've operated outside conventional rules, you're marked forever." Bishandu, the lead prosecutor, a woman probably 10 years younger than Adrian but trying hard to project seasoned authority, leaned forward. "Why should we believe this transition is real? How do we know this isn't just covering your tracks until the heat dies down?" "Because I'm putting my money where my mouth is." Adrian pulled out documents, incorporation papers for the Horizon Grant Initiative, financial records showing his investment, photographs of Seraphina meeting with program directors and grant recipients. "My partner is building a foundation that helps kids aging out of foster care, kids like she was. And I'm funding it with money that came from morally ambiguous sources because I want to do something good with resources I acquired through questionable means." The prosecutor's eyes found Seraphina, assessing her with the clinical efficiency of someone trained to spot deception. "You're Seraphina Vale, former event planner for the Blackwood Legacy Foundation." "Yes," Seraphina's voice was steady. "And you're involved with Adrian Morelli despite knowing about his criminal activities?" "I'm involved with Adrian Morelli because he's trying to build a legitimate life, because he's invested in work that matters, because he's transforming himself from someone who survived through gray area operations into someone who's creating real positive change." She met the prosecutor's eyes without flinching. "And yes, I know about his past. All of it. And I believe people deserve the chance to be better than their worst moments." The meeting lasted 3 hours. At the end, the prosecutors promised to consider everything Adrian had presented, warned him not to leave the jurisdiction, and reminded him that cooperation didn't guarantee immunity. Walking out into the summer heat, Seraphina felt exhausted and strangely hopeful at the same time. "That went better than I expected," Marcus said quietly. "They're still building a case," Adrian replied. "But at least now they see me as something other than just another criminal to prosecute." "They saw you as human," Seraphina corrected, "as someone trying to change. That matters." Adrian pulled her against him, and despite everything, the investigation, the indictments, the possibility of charges still hanging over them, he smiled. "It does matter, because of you, because you made me believe change was possible in the first place." 2 months later, the federal case against Adrian's former associates concluded with plea deals. Carlo Romano got 8 years instead of 20. The others got similar reductions. And Adrian's cooperation, limited but strategic, was noted favorably by the prosecutors. No charges were filed against him. The official statement mentioned his substantial assistance in transitioning to legitimate business operations and his demonstrated commitment to operating within legal frameworks going forward. It wasn't immunity, it wasn't vindication, but it was freedom. That night, standing on the rooftop garden where they'd first kissed, where he'd taught her about taking up space, Adrian pulled Seraphina against him and just held her. "We did it," he said quietly. "We survived." "We transformed," Seraphina corrected. "Both of us. Into people we couldn't have imagined being 6 months ago. Are you happy with who we became?" She thought about her foundation, already funding programs in 3 cities, already changing lives, already making her matter in ways she'd never dreamed possible. Thought about Adrian's legitimate business empire, smaller than before, but sustainable and legal, and something he could be proud of. Thought about the life they were building together, complicated and unconventional but real. Yes, she said simply. I'm happy. Are you? Happier than I've ever been. Happier than I thought I deserved to be. His arms tightened around her. You changed everything, Seraphina. My business, my life, my understanding of what's possible. You made me believe I could be better than my past. We made each other better, she said. That's what partners do. And standing there in the darkness, with the city glittering below them and the future stretching out uncertain but full of possibility, Seraphina felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't small or afraid or waiting for permission to exist. She was Seraphina Vale, founder of the Horizon Grant Initiative, partner to Adrian Morelli, builder of her own life on her own terms. And whatever came next, she was ready. Spring arrived in New York with the kind of gentle insistence that made even the most hardened city dwellers believe in renewal. 6 months had passed since the federal investigation concluded. 6 months of building something new from the ruins of Adrian's old empire. 6 months of Seraphina watching her foundation grow from a hopeful idea into a tangible force for change. The Horizon Grant Initiative had funded 12 programs across 5 cities. They'd helped 237 kids aging out of foster care access education, mentorship, and resources that gave them actual chances at futures beyond survival. Seraphina had hired 8 more staff members, opened a second office in Chicago, and was fielding inquiries from organizations in Los Angeles and Seattle who'd heard about her work and wanted to be part of it. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was building something that mattered, and people were noticing. But there was still one shadow that hadn't fully lifted, one ghost from the past that haunted the edges of their carefully constructed new life. Luca Moretti had disappeared after leaving the hospital, and despite Marcus's extensive network and Adrian's considerable resources, they hadn't found him. It was like he'd evaporated into nothing, leaving behind only the lingering threat of unfinished business. He's probably in Europe, Marcus said during one of their monthly security briefings, or South America, somewhere he can rebuild without you noticing until he's ready to make a move. Or he's dead, Adrian countered, though his expression suggested he didn't believe it. The wounds were serious. He could have died somewhere we didn't track. Do you actually believe that? Seraphina asked quietly. Adrian was silent for a moment, his dark eyes meeting hers with the honesty she'd come to expect from him. No, Luca is too stubborn to die quietly. He's somewhere planning something, waiting for the right moment. Then we stay vigilant, Marcus said. Maintain security protocols, monitor for any signs of his movement, and prepare for the possibility that he comes back with resources we haven't anticipated. It was the same conversation they'd had monthly for half a year, and Seraphina was tired of living with the constant low-level fear that Luca would resurface when they least expected it. I want to end this, she said firmly. Not by waiting for him to make the first move, but by actually resolving it. Finding him, confronting him, finishing what started in that warehouse. Both men looked at her with varying degrees of surprise. That's dangerous, Marcus said. If we go looking for Luca actively, we expose ourselves. Give him the opportunity to set traps, prepare ambushes. We're already exposed, Seraphina argued. He knows where we live, where we work, who matters to us. The only advantage we have is that he hasn't moved yet. But every day we wait is another day he gets stronger, builds alliances, plans something we can't predict. She's right, Adrian said slowly. We've been reactive this whole time. Maybe it's time to be proactive. Marcus pulled out his phone, already scrolling through contacts. I'll reach out to some people. See if anyone's heard anything about Luca's location or activities. But if we're doing this, we do it smart. No rushing in. No warehouse confrontations without proper planning. Agreed, Adrian said. We find him, we assess his capabilities, and then we end this on our terms. The first real lead came 2 weeks later from an unexpected source. Elena, the woman who did something with international finance, and whom Seraphina had met at that gallery opening months ago, called Adrian with information that made his expression go dark and dangerous. Luca's in Buenos Aires, he told Seraphina after ending the call. Elena has contacts there who spotted him meeting with some Argentine businessmen who have connections to shipping and logistics. He's trying to rebuild, probably planning to establish operations that can compete with mine from outside my territory. So he's not coming back for revenge. He's just moving on. Maybe. Or he's building a base of operations that will let him come back stronger. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Either way, we need to know what he's planning. Then we go to Buenos Aires, Seraphina said simply. Absolutely not. If Luca is there and we show up, it puts you directly in his sights again. I'm already in his sights? He grabbed me off the street in Manhattan, threatened me in a car, tried to use me as leverage. Hiding from him now doesn't make me safer. It just means I'm waiting for him to make the next move. She moved closer to Adrian, taking his hands in hers. We're partners. You said that. Partners face challenges together. Partners also protect each other from unnecessary risks. And partners trust each other to make their own choices about acceptable risk levels. Seraphina held his gaze steadily. I'm going to Buenos Aires. The only question is whether we go together or if I have to book my own flight. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him cycling through arguments, protective instincts warring with respect for her autonomy. Finally, he sighed. You're stubborn. I learned from the best. She smiled slightly. Besides, you taught me to take up space. This is me taking up space in decisions about my own safety. Fair point. He pulled her against him, and she felt the tension in his body, fear and pride and resignation all mixed together. Fine, we go to Buenos Aires, but we do it with a full security team, with careful planning, and with exit strategies if things go wrong. I wouldn't expect anything less. They flew to Buenos Aires 5 days later on a private jet that Adrian chartered with the casual efficiency of someone who'd navigated international travel for questionable purposes many times before. Marcus came with them, along with 2 other security specialists whose names Seraphina didn't catch, but whose competence was evident in every controlled movement. The city was beautiful in the early autumn, warm but not hot, with jacaranda trees blooming purple against clear skies. They stayed in a hotel in Recoleta, elegant and European-influenced, with security that Marcus had personally vetted. Elena's contact says Luca has been meeting at a restaurant in Palermo, Marcus reported after their first night. Expensive place, popular with businessmen who value discretion. He's there most evenings around 9, usually with 2 or 3 associates. Public location, Adrian mused. Smart. Makes it harder for us to confront him directly without witnesses. Unless we become customers, Seraphina said. Just 2 people having dinner. Nothing threatening, nothing aggressive. Just a conversation between old family members who happen to be in the same city. Marcus looked skeptical. He'll see through that immediately. No, it's a setup. Of course he will. But what's he going to do? Cause a scene in a public restaurant? Attack us in front of witnesses? Seraphina turned to Adrian. You said you wanted to end this on your terms. Here's how. We sit down, we talk like civilized people, and we find out what he actually wants. Maybe it's revenge. Maybe it's just to rebuild his life somewhere you're not. Either way, we get information instead of just guessing. Adrian studied her with that intensity that still made her pulse quicken. You've changed. 6 months ago, you would never have suggested walking into a potential confrontation this directly. 6 months ago, I was still learning what it meant to take up space. Now I know. She held his gaze. I'm tired of being afraid of Luca Moretti, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of letting him dictate how we live our lives. So we go to dinner, we have a conversation, and we end this, one way or another. The restaurant was exactly what Elena's contact had described. Expensive, discreet, the kind of place where powerful people made deals over wine and perfectly cooked steak. Seraphina wore a dress in deep emerald that made her feel powerful, and Adrian was in a dark suit that transformed him from reformed businessman into the dangerous man he'd been before she met him. They arrived at 8:30, requested a table with a view of the room, and waited. Luca appeared at 9:15, looking thinner than Seraphina remembered, but otherwise recovered from his injuries. He was with 2 men who had the look of hired muscle trying to pass as business associates, and he was laughing at something one of them said when he spotted Adrian across the restaurant. The laughter died immediately. For a long moment, the cousins just stared at each other across the elegant dining room. Then Luca said something to his associates, stood, and walked over to their table with the confidence of someone who knew he had backup nearby. Adrian, Seraphina. His voice was cool, controlled, giving nothing away. What an unexpected coincidence. Sit down, Luca, Adrian said quietly. Let's talk like family instead of enemies. We stopped being family when you shot me 3 times and left me bleeding in a warehouse. You rigged explosives and tried to kill everyone in that warehouse. I'd say we're even. Adrian gestured to the empty chair at their table. But we can keep tallying grievances if you prefer, or we can have an actual conversation about what happens next. Luca considered for a moment, then sat. Up close, Seraphina could see the weight he'd lost, the lines that hadn't been there before, the slight stiffness that suggested his injuries still bothered him. You look well, Luca said, his eyes moving between them. Both of you. I hear the federal investigation concluded favorably, that you've gone legitimate, transformed yourself into a respectable businessman funding charitable causes. I'm trying to build something sustainable, something that doesn't require constant violence to maintain. Adrian's voice was calm but firm. What about you? What are you building in Buenos Aires? A life far away from you and your redemption story. Luca's smile was sharp. Did you really think I'd stay in Chicago and accept being pushed out? That I'd let you have New York and all the territory we were supposed to share? We were never supposed to share anything. Uncle Lorenzo's plan had you in Chicago and me in New York. Separate territories, separate operations. You're the one who decided that wasn't enough. Because you took more than your share. You came to New York with nothing and built an empire while I struggled to maintain operations in Chicago. You got rich while I fought for scraps. And then you have the audacity to lecture me about greed? Luca's voice had risen slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. He took a breath, visibly controlling himself. But you're right. This isn't about territory anymore. You won that fight when you shot me and fed information to the feds. I didn't feed them information about you specifically. I gave them context about my own operations to avoid prosecution. Semantics. The result was the same. Your enemies got arrested while you walked free. Luca leaned back in his chair, studying them both. So what do you want, Adrian? Why did you fly all the way to Buenos Aires to have dinner with the cousin you tried to kill? To end this, Seraphina said before Adrian could respond. To stop living with the constant threat that you'll come back for revenge. To find out what you actually want so we can give it to you, or at least negotiate something that lets us all move on. Luca's attention shifted to her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Not just of who she was, but of what she'd become. Not the frightened woman he'd grabbed off a Manhattan street, but someone who met his gaze without flinching. You've changed, he said quietly. You're not afraid of me anymore. I'm terrified of you, but I'm done letting fear control my choices. Seraphina kept her voice steady. You threatened me to get to Adrian. You tried to use me as leverage in a war I didn't start. And now you're in Buenos Aires, and I need to know if you're planning to come back and try again, or if you're actually moving on with your life. Luca was quiet for a long moment, his expression cycling through calculations she couldn't quite read. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. I came to Buenos Aires because staying in the States meant constant conflict with Adrian, because I was tired of fighting a war I couldn't win, because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because the woman I was seeing told me she was pregnant, and I didn't want my child growing up in the middle of a gang war. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and humanizing. You're going to be a father, Adrian said slowly. In about 4 months, a daughter. Something softened in Luca's expression. And I realized I didn't want her to grow up the way we did. Surrounded by violence, learning that power comes from intimidation, believing that family means loyalty through fear rather than love. So you left, Seraphina said quietly. You're building a different life here. I'm trying to. The men I'm meeting with, they're legitimate businessmen. Import-export, but the real kind, not the euphemism we used in New York. I'm starting over, building something I can be proud of instead of something I have to hide. Luca's eyes found Adrian's. I'm doing exactly what you did. Transforming. Trying to be better than my worst moments. Adrian was quiet, and Seraphina could see the conflict in his expression. Old anger warring with unexpected understanding. The desire for revenge confronting the reality that his enemy was trying to change just like he had. Why should I believe you? Adrian asked finally. You tried to kill me. You threatened Seraphina. You brought federal attention to operations that cost me millions to restructure. Why should I trust that this isn't just another strategy? Because I'm telling you the truth, and you know what that looks like even when you don't want to believe it. Luca pulled out his phone, swiped through several photos, then turned it toward them. That's Maria. She's 26, from a good family, has no idea about my past beyond vague references to complicated business. And that's our daughter on the ultrasound, due in October. The photo showed a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, her hand resting on a small baby bump. The ultrasound image beside it was grainy but clear enough to see the tiny form of a developing baby. Seraphina felt something shift in her chest. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. Luca Moretti was trying to protect something precious, just like Adrian had protected her. He was choosing transformation over violence, future over revenge, exactly the same choice they'd made. Congratulations, she said quietly, and meant it. Luca's expression flickered with something that might have been gratitude. Thank you. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For grabbing you, for threatening you, for trying to use you as leverage. You were innocent in all this, and I made you a target because I was angry at Adrian. That was wrong. Yes, it was, Seraphina agreed. But I understand why you did it. Desperation makes people do terrible things. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers with the easy intimacy of months together. So what do we do now? How do we end this so we can both move forward? Luca considered for a moment. We agree to stay out of each other's territories. You keep New York and whatever other cities you've expanded to. I build my operations here in Argentina and maybe Brazil if things go well. We don't compete, we don't interfere, we don't come after each other. And if we cross paths accidentally, if our businesses end up in proximity, then we act like adults instead of gang members. We negotiate, we find solutions that work for both parties. We remember that we're trying to be better than we were. Luca extended his hand across the table. Can you accept that? Adrian looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Seraphina could feel the tension in his body, the years of conflict and betrayal and violence between these two men who shared blood but not trust. Adrian, she said softly. He's trying. Just like you tried. Just like we're all trying to be better than our pasts. Something in her voice seemed to reach him. Adrian's grip on her hand tightened briefly, then he reached across the table and shook Luca's hand. Peace, Adrian said simply. Real peace, not just a temporary ceasefire. You build your life in Buenos Aires, I'll build mine in New York, and we let the past stay in the past. Peace, Luca agreed. And family. Maybe not the way Uncle Lorenzo imagined, but family nonetheless. They finished dinner with careful conversation that avoided the darkest parts of their shared history. Luca talked about Maria, about his plans for the baby, about the apartment they were renovating in a neighborhood Seraphina had never heard of. Adrian talked about his legitimate business ventures, about the Horizon Grant Initiative, about building something sustainable that didn't require constant vigilance. And slowly, carefully, the two men who'd tried to kill each other in a warehouse 6 months ago found something like understanding. When they left the restaurant, Luca walking back to his associates and Adrian and Seraphina heading to their waiting car, Seraphina felt lighter than she had in months. Do you believe him? She asked as they drove through Buenos Aires' nighttime streets. About the baby. Yes. About changing his life, probably. About never coming after us again? Adrian was quiet for a moment. I want to believe him. And that's new for me. Choosing to trust instead of assuming the worst. You're changing too, Seraphina said. We both are. And to people who believe in second chances because we needed them ourselves. Do you think we're fools? Trusting someone who threatened you, who tried to destroy everything I built? I think we're optimists, and maybe a little foolish, but also brave enough to believe that people can change if they're given the chance. She leaned against him in the back seat. Besides, if Luca does come back for revenge, we'll handle it, together, like we handle everything. Adrian kissed the top of her head, and they rode back to the hotel in comfortable silence, the shadow of Luca Moretti finally lifting from their carefully constructed future. They spent 3 more days in Buenos Aires, partly to ensure Luca's story held up under observation, and partly because neither of them had taken a real vacation in months. They walked through San Telmo's antique markets, drank wine in Palermo's cafes, watched tango dancers in Plaza Dorrego, and let themselves be tourists instead of people running from danger or building empires. On their last night, standing on their hotel balcony watching the city lights, Adrian pulled a small box from his pocket. "I was going to wait until we got back to New York," he said, opening it to reveal a ring, simple platinum with a single diamond that caught the ambient light and scattered it into rainbows. "But this feels like the right moment. We survived everything: warehouse shootouts, federal investigations, confrontations with enemies in foreign cities. We transformed ourselves and our lives. We built something real together." Seraphina's throat tightened, her eyes filling with unexpected tears. "Seraphina Vale, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in everything, officially and permanently? Will you keep teaching me how to be better than my past and let me keep showing you that you deserve to take up space?" "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes to all of it." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything between them, unexpected but exactly right. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony on the rooftop garden where they'd first kissed, where Adrian had taught her about taking up space, where they'd stood after the federal investigation concluded and promised each other that they were ready for whatever came next. Marcus was Adrian's best man, giving a speech that was surprisingly emotional about watching his employer transform from a man who trusted no one into someone who'd learned to love. Elena and several of Adrian's other former associates attended, all of them legitimate business people now, all of them part of the same journey toward building something better. Seraphina's staff from the Horizon Grant Initiative filled several rows: the program director who'd cried when they approved 3-year funding, the grants manager who'd helped identify organizations making real differences, the kids they'd helped who wanted to celebrate the woman who'd seen them when no one else had. And in the back, surprising everyone, was a massive floral arrangement with a card that read simply, "Congratulations. May your daughter know only peace. Luca Catherine." Whitmore didn't attend, but Seraphina hadn't expected her to. The Blackwood Foundation's former invisible event planner had become too visible, too successful, too undeniably important for Catherine to acknowledge without admitting her own failures. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple, but profound. Adrian promised to keep seeing her when the rest of the world looked away, to build a life where taking up space was celebrated instead of punished, to be her partner in transformation and growth, and whatever challenges came next. Seraphina promised to keep pushing him toward the light, to remind him that redemption was possible, to be his partner in building something legitimate and sustainable and good from the ashes of his complicated past. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause, and Seraphina felt something settle into place inside her, the final piece of a transformation that had begun with a single white rose and a note that said, "Take space." The reception was exactly what she'd wanted: intimate, joyful, focused on celebration rather than performance. No one gave speeches about how flawlessly everything was executed. No one took credit for work they hadn't done. It was just people who mattered, celebrating something real. Late in the evening, as guests mingled and music played and the city glittered below them, Adrian pulled Seraphina aside to a quiet corner of the rooftop. "Happy?" he asked, his hand settling on her waist. "Deliriously. You?" "More than I knew I could be." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her mouth. "I keep thinking about that night at the gala. If I hadn't gone to that terrace, if I hadn't seen you standing there looking like you were trying to disappear, if I'd stayed inside with all those people performing their importance instead of actually being important." "But you didn't stay inside. You saw me, and everything changed." "Everything changed," Adrian agreed, "for both of us." Marcus appeared at the edge of their private moment, looking apologetic but urgent. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who insists on speaking with you. Says it's important." "Who?" Adrian's body tensed slightly, old instincts never fully disappearing. "A woman named Julia. Says she worked with Seraphina at the Blackwood Foundation." Seraphina's eyebrows rose. Julia had been one of the junior coordinators, quiet and competent, one of the few people who'd actually acknowledged Seraphina's work. "Send her over," Seraphina said. Julia appeared moments later, looking nervous but determined in a dress that was nice but clearly not expensive. She had dark circles under her eyes and her hands twisted together anxiously. "I'm sorry to crash your wedding," she said immediately, But I didn't know how else to reach you, and this couldn't wait. What's wrong? Seraphina asked, her professional instincts kicking in automatically. Catherine Whitmore is embezzling from the foundation, has been for years. I found documentation while going through files for the annual audit. Fake vendor invoices, inflated event costs, money being diverted to personal accounts. Julia pulled out a folder from her bag. I didn't know who to tell. The board is all her friends and donors she's cultivated, but I remembered how you always did the right thing, even when no one acknowledged it. And I thought maybe you'd know what to do. Seraphina took the folder, flipping through documents that showed exactly what Julia described. Systematic theft disguised as legitimate expenses, hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned off over multiple years. Why bring this to me? She asked quietly. I don't work there anymore. Because you care about the work, not just the appearance of caring. And because Catherine destroyed you for being good at your job, and I thought you might want to see her face consequences for once. Julia's voice was fierce despite her nervous demeanor. She's been taking credit for your work for years. Maybe it's time someone took credit for exposing hers. Adrian had moved to read over Seraphina's shoulder, his expression darkening as he scanned the documents. This is solid evidence. With this, the board would have to act, probably bring in law enforcement. Which would destroy the foundation's reputation, Seraphina said slowly. Hurt the programs they fund, damage the organizations that depend on Blackwood grants. Or, Adrian said quietly, you could leverage it differently. Make Catherine resign quietly, ensure the money gets returned to the foundation's accounts, install leadership that actually cares about the mission instead of personal glory. Seraphina looked at the documents, at Julia's hopeful expression, at Adrian's steady support. 6 months ago, she would have been afraid to use this kind of leverage, afraid to take action that might have consequences, afraid to be anything other than invisible. But she wasn't that person anymore. Julia, can you get me a meeting with Edward Blackwood? The patriarch, not the board. Just him, privately. I think so. He's been asking questions about the finances lately, like he suspects something isn't right. Then set it up. Tell him I have information about foundation operations that requires his immediate attention. Seraphina handed back the folder. Make copies of everything first. Multiple copies stored in different locations. And Julia, thank you for caring enough to do the right thing even when it was risky. Julia left with promises to arrange the meeting, and Seraphina turned to find Adrian watching her with pride evident in his expression. What are you planning? He asked. To take up space, to use the power I have to make things better, instead of just accepting how they are. She straightened her shoulders. Catherine Whitmore made me invisible for years. Now I'm going to make sure she can't do that to anyone else. The meeting with Edward Blackwood happened 2 days after the wedding, in his private study in a townhouse that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. He was in his 80s, sharp-eyed, and clearly suspicious about why his former employee had requested an urgent private meeting. Seraphina laid out everything, the embezzlement, the documentation, the systematic theft that had been happening under his family's name, and then she presented her terms. Catherine resigns immediately. The money gets returned to the foundation accounts. And you install new leadership, people who actually care about the mission, who value their staff, who won't take credit for other people's work. She kept her voice firm, professional. Do this quietly. Avoid the scandal, and the foundation survives. Refuse. And I take this evidence to law enforcement and the press, and you get to watch your family legacy destroyed by someone you trusted to protect it. Edward Blackwood studied her for a long moment, and she could see him reassessing. This wasn't the invisible event planner he vaguely remembered. This was someone who understood power and wasn't afraid to use it. You've changed, he said finally. I remember you from galas. Always in the background, never drawing attention. I learned to take up space, Seraphina said simply. And I learned that sometimes using power is the only way to protect people who don't have it. Catherine will fight this. She'll claim the documentation is fabricated, that you're retaliating for being let go. Then let her fight. The evidence is solid, the paper trail is clear, and I have nothing to lose by going public. But you do. Your family name, your foundation's reputation, the programs that depend on Blackwood funding. Seraphina leaned forward slightly. I'm giving you a chance to fix this quietly. I suggest you take it. 3 weeks later, the Blackwood Legacy Foundation announced Catherine Whitmore's resignation for personal reasons and the appointment of new executive leadership committed to transparency and staff development. The embezzled funds were quietly returned, attributed to accounting corrections from previous fiscal years. And Julia got promoted to senior coordinator with a significant raise and actual recognition for her work. Seraphina heard about it from Julia's excited phone call and felt satisfaction settle warm in her chest. Not revenge exactly, but justice. Not just for herself, but for everyone Catherine had made invisible over the years. "How does it feel?" Adrian asked that night, finding her on their rooftop garden looking out at the city. "Good, really good." Seraphina turned to face him. "I used power I've built to make things better, to protect people who needed protecting, to hold someone accountable who thought she was untouchable." "You took up space," Adrian said, pulling her against him. "I did. Finally. Completely. Without apologizing or making myself small." She looked up at him. "Thank you. For teaching me that I could." "You taught yourself. I just showed you it was possible." The Horizon Grant Initiative continued to grow. By the end of their first year, they'd funded programs in 12 cities, helped over 500 kids, and established partnerships with organizations across the country. Seraphina hired more staff, opened more offices, built infrastructure that would outlast her personal involvement. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was on boards, giving speeches, meeting with legislators about foster care reform. People knew her name, recognized her face, sought her expertise, and every single time someone tried to dismiss her or talk over her or assume she was less important than she was, she remembered Adrian's words from that first night on the terrace. "You deserve to take up space." So she did. Adrian's business continued its transformation. The shipping company operated entirely legitimately now, moving cargo that could withstand any customs inspection. The security consulting focused on corporate clients with actual legal needs. The real estate holdings generated steady income without requiring moral compromises. He'd lost territory and money in the transition, but gained something more valuable: peace. The ability to operate without constantly looking over his shoulder. The freedom to build relationships based on trust instead of fear. A future that didn't require warehouse confrontations or federal investigations. They heard from Luca occasionally, birth announcements when his daughter arrived, Christmas cards from Buenos Aires, brief messages about business expansion into Brazil. The cousins would never be close, but they'd found something like family in the shared experience of transformation. 1 year after their wedding, standing in the same rooftop garden where they'd married, Adrian presented Seraphina with a gift. "What's this?" she asked, looking at the small velvet box. "Open it." Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a butterfly, delicate and beautiful, with tiny diamonds that caught the light. "Your mother called you her little butterfly," Adrian said softly. "Said you'd transform into something beautiful someday." She was right. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears as he fastened the necklace around her neck, the butterfly resting just above her heart. "You transformed," he continued, his hand settling on her shoulders. "From invisible to essential. From someone who made herself small to someone who takes up exactly the space she deserves. From a woman who let others define her worth to someone who knows her own value." "We both transformed," Seraphina corrected, turning to face him. "You taught me about taking up space, but I taught you about using power for good instead of just for survival. We made each other better." "We did." Adrian pulled her close, and they stood together as the city lights came on across Manhattan, as the spring evening settled into comfortable darkness, as their future stretched out before them full of possibility. "What do you want next?" Seraphina asked. "For us, for our life, for whatever comes after this." Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. "I want to keep building. The business, the foundation, a family, if that's something you want. I want to prove that transformation isn't just possible, it's sustainable. That people like us, who came from nothing, who survived through questionable means, who had to fight for everything we have, that we can build something legitimate and lasting and good." "A family," Seraphina repeated softly. "You want children? With you?" "Yes. I want to give them everything we didn't have. Stability, love, parents who choose to be present instead of absent. I want to show them that power can be used to protect instead of harm. The taking up space doesn't require pushing others down. That transformation is always possible if you're willing to do the work. Seraphina thought about the little girl in Buenos Aires, about the kids her foundation was helping, about the possibility of raising children who never had to feel invisible or small or unworthy. I want that too, she said. All of it. The family, the continued building, the proof that transformation is sustainable. Then we'll build it, together, like we've built everything else. They talked about the future until the stars came out over Manhattan, about expanding the foundation internationally, about Adrian's plans to mentor young business people from disadvantaged backgrounds, about the home they wanted to buy outside the city where hypothetical children could have space to grow. And as they talked, Seraphina realized that she'd stopped thinking about what she deserved and started simply knowing her own worth. She didn't need Adrian or the foundation or anyone else to tell her she mattered. She knew it, felt it in her bones, carried it with the same certainty she carried her own name. She was Seraphina Vale Morelli, founder of the Horizon Grant Initiative, partner to a man who'd chosen transformation over revenge, builder of a life that mattered not because someone acknowledged it, but because she'd decided it did. She had taken up space in a world that tried to make her invisible, and she would never make herself small again. 5 years later, standing in Central Park beneath blooming cherry trees, Seraphina watched her 3-year-old daughter chase butterflies through the grass while Adrian held their infant son and pointed out the different species. The Horizon Grant Initiative had helped over 3,000 kids across 20 cities. Catherine Whitmore had faded into obscurity, her name synonymous with the kind of leadership that valued appearance over substance. The warehouse in Red Hook was now a community center funded by Adrian's foundation, offering programs for at-risk youth. Luca sent pictures occasionally. His daughter was 4 now, bright-eyed and clearly adored. He and Maria had married, expanded into legitimate shipping operations across South America, built exactly the kind of life he'd described in that Buenos Aires restaurant. And Seraphina and Adrian had built their life too. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and substantial and theirs. "Mama, look!" Their daughter ran toward them, hands cupped carefully around a butterfly she'd somehow caught. "It's beautiful." "It is," Seraphina agreed, kneeling down to look at the delicate creature. "Should we let it go so it can fly?" "Okay, but I want to watch it fly away." They opened her small hands together, and the butterfly took flight, circling once before disappearing into the spring afternoon. "Your mother would have loved this," Adrian said softly, shifting their son to one arm so he could take Seraphina's hand with the other. "Seeing you with our daughter, watching you be the parent you never had, knowing you transformed into exactly what she knew you could be." "I hope she would be proud," Seraphina said quietly. "She would be. I know I am. Every single day." Their daughter grabbed both their hands, and they walked through Central Park as the afternoon light turned golden, as the city hummed with life around them, as their future continued to unfold in ways they'd never imagined that night at the Blackwood Legacy Gala, when a powerful stranger had emerged from shadows and told an invisible woman she deserved to take up space. Seraphina had taken that space and filled it with purpose, with love, with a foundation that changed lives and a family that chose each other every day. She had transformed from the woman no one saw into someone who couldn't be ignored, not because she demanded attention, but because she'd built something too substantial to dismiss. And when people asked her how she'd done it, how she'd gone from invisible event planner to influential philanthropist, from accepting invisibility to demanding recognition, from making herself small to taking up exactly the space she deserved, she always gave the same answer. She'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by other people's acknowledgement. She'd found a partner who saw her when no one else did. She'd chosen to believe she deserved better, and then she'd done the work to build it. She'd transformed. And transformation, she'd learned, wasn't a single moment of change. It was a daily choice to be better than yesterday, to use power for good instead of just for survival, to take up space without apology. It was choosing to be visible when the world preferred you invisible. It was choosing to matter when others said you didn't. It was choosing yourself over and over until that choice became as natural as breathing. And Seraphina Vale Morelli, once invisible, now undeniable, had made that choice and changed everything.